All right, good evening, everyone. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Montclair Planning Board. Notice of this meeting has been, in accordance with the New Jersey Open Public Meeting Act, has been met by placing a copy of the notice in the newspaper that is designated by the township for such notices, and also by placing a notice on the first floor of the municipal building. An electronic notice of the meeting is posted on the township's website. The meeting is going to be broadcast live on Channel 34 and is streaming live and will be available on demand on YouTube. This meeting is a quasi-judicial proceeding, meaning that the board has powers and procedures that resemble a court of law, and we are obligated to objectively determine facts and to draw conclusions from them in order to provide the basis for official action. Any questions or comments should be limited to those issues that the board can legally consider in reaching such a decision, and decorum appropriate for judicial hearing is expected to be maintained at all times. The first thing on our agenda this evening is our roll call, and I am here.
Vice Chair Brodock.
I'm here.
Mr. Graham's excused. Mr. Ianwali.
Here.
Ms. Lockman.
Here.
Mr. Ortiz.
Here.
Mr. Pierre.
Present.
Counselor Schlager is excused. Ms. Willis. Mr. Jacobson is excused. Mr. Neiman.
Here.
Okay, we also have Mr. Neese and Ms. Taberry.
All right, we have minutes from the November 7th meeting.
I received changes to the minutes from Ms. Lockman and Vice Chair Brodock. Are there any additional changes to the minutes? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Mr. Pierre, is that you? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
One extension.
Okay. And Mark, Ms. Willis is here.
Good evening, Ms. Willis.
You might want to rethink about taking off your coat.
It's a little chilly in here.
Well, I'll try my.
Let's keep it close. All right. We don't have any resolutions to review, so the next thing that we come to is the council referral of the ADU ordinance.
If I could just go back to one item before that, was this just the calendar for next year?
Okay, we had that on the after, but
Oh, okay.
oh,
Did I put that on?
it was number 2 on the.
Oh, I did, all right. Oh, anyway, all right. Anyway, regarding the calendar, there was a request to start the meeting at 7 o'clock as opposed to 7:30. I don't know if you, John, you weren't here at the last meeting, if that's a problem for you, or anybody else who's here.
Mondays so far, it's not, because I don't have to go into my office on Monday. If we go back to 5 days a week, it kind of catches me a little short.
Right.
What about other members of the board? Does anybody else have any issues?
My recollection was that it wasn't really a request, it was just Mr. Jacobson threw it out as a possible, something for the board to consider.
Right.
He wasn't requesting it.
It was a suggestion.
Suggestion.
I find 7:30 easier, but I suspect I could do something to get here at 7.
Yeah,
Same as well. Just gives me a little bit more time to kind
Yeah, that's the
of watch
thing.
Jeffrey. Maybe one way.
Oh.
Okay. And I think then the consensus is let's keep it at 7:30.
Works for me.
I think that works.
All right.
And I changed the 2 dates on the calendar as suggested, so I think we'll be able to finalize it and publish it. Okay?
Looks good.
So the next item on our agenda is the report from the redevelopment subcommittee on the ADU ordinance. We had participation from Mr. Ianwali, Ms. Lockman, Ms. Willis, and Bill Harrison, the chair of the Board of Adjustment, who's got a lot of land use experience and gave us a lot of information and things to consider regarding the ordinance. One of the comments that's in here, I know, Tony, I think you said it at the last meeting, is that it should be more publicly discussed.
I don't think I need to comment again, but
Right.
yes, yep.
So the second item was some of the legal issues in the ordinance. I know, Arthur, you and I spoke about it a little bit. I don't know how you feel about these issues that were raised by Bill Harrison.
I agree with him. I think Bill is right, that the purpose of zoning is not to, having owners responsible in the way this ordinance makes them responsible, I think, is a real problem. I think the ordinance itself, just expanding beyond just that one concept a little bit, I think the ordinance itself is internally inconsistent in many ways. And I think I don't want to say it should go back to the drawing board, but I think it does need a considerable amount of clarification and explanation. Because I read it several times today, and there were things about it that I just did not understand or just didn't put it together. It just didn't really congeal for me.
Can you talk about some of those issues? I'm just, yeah.
Sure. So, for example, on page 4, paragraph 2, quote, "If the zoning officer approves the proposed ADU, the applicant must commence construction within 2 years of the zoning officer's determination, or the permit will be revoked." Yet in paragraph 5, it says, "Construction of the ADU must be substantially completed within one," and if you buy the changes that the subcommittee made, 1 year of the issuance of the ADU permit. So it doesn't quite add up.
If we recommend eliminating paragraph 5 in its entirety, then that issue goes away.
That issue would certainly go away.
So that might be an easy recommendation. Because I think it's all covered under the 2 years in item 2, which I think mimics the municipal land use law anyway.
I think what we discussed in the zoning committee, we didn't discuss the ordinance. We discussed more macro issues that were associated. The main thing is that nobody knows about this. And I know that's an exaggeration, but everyone I speak to who owns a home in a single-family district said, "Oh, really? That could happen?" And I think that people look at their backyards as a sanctuary, and they like their backyards. And when I say, well, there could be another home that's 6 feet, or if they are granted a variance, 1 foot from your property line, people said, "Oh, really?" So I just think that the main thing is that, and I know that there are advocates and it could be a really good thing, but I just think that it needs to be more widely broadcast by the council to say, this is all the great stuff, and this is what could happen. That's the main thing. And the other thing, the main thing is that you can't force occupancy. You know, it will likely, according to Bill Harrison's comments, you can't force the occupancy. It could be anyone. It could be someone buying a house, demolishing it, and putting 2 units up and renting both of them.
Right.
And we didn't get into the minutia in the ordinance itself. It was
Actually, he
more-
did a little bit.
We did.
He did a little bit. Remember, we went line by line, so.
Right.
Well, but that covers-
The memo with two-family.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
it's all in the memo.
It is. So I think that items number 1 represents the view about or paragraph number 1 represents your view about, or the board's view about getting the word out. Paragraph number 2, I think, adequately expresses the concern about owner occupancy and the potential limitations that require owner occupancy. Number 3 recommends that it only apply to one-family homes in the RO, ROA, and R1 districts, and 1- and 2-family zones in the R2 zones. So I think we did talk about the fact that the zones that are referenced here are all 1 and 2 family zones. The ordinance applied to 3 family structures, which are not permitted in those zones anyway. And they would require, if anybody wanted to put an ADU, they'd have to go to the Board of Adjustment for a use variance, an expansion of a non-conforming use. So why are we even putting it in here? So that was the consideration there, that it's more appropriate to keep it to 1 and 2 families.
But just let me ask a question. So, someone who owns a 3-family, they'd have to go before the Board of, zoning board for a variance.
Right, a use variance.
Use.
Yeah. Why is that a problem?
Because the presumption is that it's not a permitted use.
Right?
And this is you're allowing an expansion of a non-permitted use in your ordinance.
It's a non-conforming use to begin with. Yeah.
Right.
It's harder
So
to
it's a
get.
non-conforming and then be further non-conforming. So that's
Exactly.
what the problem is,
It's
yeah.
kind of a.
But if as a policy, the town wants to encourage ADUs, and seemingly some of the counselors must have put this in because it wasn't in the original draft, then is this an insurmountable problem? I'm just
Well,
wondering.
if somebody wanted to, if it was permitted, if ADUs were permitted in town, and somebody in a 3-family zone wanted to go, just because the statute didn't explicitly allow it in 3-family, that wouldn't stop them from going and making the application.
Right.
And before the zoning board, and if the zoning board chose to grant it, then they would be able to move forward within the limitations of
Right.
what the statute provides for 1 and 2 family homes, right?
The ordinance,
The
what the
ordinance,
ordinance
rather.
provides.
Excuse me,
Right.
yes. So it wouldn't prevent it. It wouldn't be a roadblock. But you don't want this ordinance somehow to be construed as permitting, it becoming some sort of permitted use by the fact that it references it.
Right.
Yep.
I was curious also about the fact that.
Carol, can you turn your microphone on?
Thank you so much. The second memo from our subcommittee had to deal with the fact that the courts have consistently ruled that land use boards cannot impose conditions requiring the dwelling unit be owner occupied,
Right.
and that we are really permitted only to say how much building we're allowed in a particular area, but we can't say who has to own it. And that concerns me when I looked at the ordinance, when I looked particularly at number 7, which not only makes it a finable offense not to be owner occupied and to report. It seems to me that whole paragraph, that whole area needs to be eliminated because it's in conflict with what we already know to be the case, and that is that we cannot insist that the owner be the occupier. So that is the whole thing about finding them if they're not the occupier and reporting every year that they still occupy it. It seems to me that would need a considerable amount of change, because that is not the point we can enforce.
I think it could be legally challenged.
Oh, it
Right.
would be.
It would be, well, it could be,
Yeah.
and we may be exposed to that, is what
Oh.
I'm reading in this.
And I agree. I think that's what would happen down the road, maybe not initially, but down the road, that will happen.
Right.
Someone will challenge that and say, hey, wait a minute.
Right.
Because zoning is not meant to be, the regulation of owners. Zoning is
right.
meant to be the regulation of property.
Right. So that whole area seems to be out of place and ill-advised.
And I think the memo says that. And if this is the memo we send to the council, I think we'll clearly state that recommendation.
But we need to address the fact that the ordinance has that conflict, and particularly where it is in the ordinance, so that it can be
Well,
addressed.
to clarify, we can eliminate, we could recommend that requirement be eliminated from the ordinance.
Right.
I just have a question about the council's obligation to inform the public about an ordinance like this. I mean,
It's
Tony-
it's very important.
Well, it is important, but it's not routinely done. Just to bring up rent control, they impose rent control in 2- and 3-family homes without any public information. So then that has much more far-reaching implications than this ADU ordinance, in my view. So what is the council's obligation? They read the ordinance once, which they've already done, I guess, and now the second time they're reading it, will be the only other time for a hearing, and
That's it.
that's it,
That's what
right?
they're obligated to do.
All right, so they voted on it once, so if they decide they want to educate the public, what happens? They just start an education
Again,
campaign now?
that's a policy decision on their part.
Oh.
If they say, you know, we take the planning, hey, this is number one on the planning board's memo, that the public should be more involved.
Yep.
If they decide, as a matter of policy, that they want to advertise this, they want community input,
Yep.
they can set up meetings all over town. the
But
way-
if they don't, they can just vote on this at the next time
That's
that
their
it's on?
obligation.
Okay, all right, thank you.
But the legal matters is, as an obligation as a planning board, is it not our responsibility to point out the legal issues with it
And
in
we
such
do.
a way that they cannot be ignored?
Well, they can always-
And what I'm saying is that,
They can
no, I
always
mean, we've
ignore
not,
what we say.
okay, yes, but I mean, if there's not enough detail about what it is that we're concerned about, then it doesn't even pop into their
I think
level of awareness.
regarding your concern, or the board's concern about ownership, if you go to page 2 of the ordinance, item number 1, I think the planning board should recommend eliminate item number 1, which is either the ADU or the primary dwelling unit shall be the primary domicile of a person who has an ownership interest in the property. Just take that out.
But doesn't that appear elsewhere? Isn't there another?
I know, I think we take out 1. I didn't see it elsewhere.
But that cuts out the entire reasoning why the council put this forth, because it was put forth for the purpose of helping people stay in their homes. So, and I think that it made it more attractive to say, don't worry about it. We're putting this regulation in. It's not going to be abused because the requirement is to keep homeownership. Once you take it out, it opens it up to anyone, any developer, anyone coming in, buying a home and creating an ADU with, without that requirement. So it sort of undercuts the whole rationale of why it's a great thing.
Well, I think it still gives the flexibility that the seniors and other people wanted, but I think it does open it up beyond what was anticipated.
I think perhaps we could say or recommend, I'm not sure, I'm tossing it out, but isn't it possible that you can say that the unit cannot be separated from the primary development, as the problem was a single-family home, I think, I forgot what town it was, where they made condominiums and sold them separately? That this is, if it's an auxiliary unit, you cannot separate the unit from and sell it as two separate pieces of property.
Some towns do that.
So
Or-
that
But
seems
that's
to.
the same issue.
And could we restrict the use of the property in such a way that it couldn't be rented out to a non-family member, or that the owner had to be able to use it, Otherwise, it just
Well,
becomes extra space for the main house.
I don't know that.
That face doesn't look very positive.
Doesn't, I'm not.
I think we're getting back into use.
Well,
who uses it.
ownership, we can't do ownership,
Right.
but we can regulate uses.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if there's some way we can focus on use and say that the use of this ADU is restricted to only certain uses. And one of them would be occupancy by an owner, by the owner if he wants to do something else to rent out the main house, or it could be occupancy by a family member of the owner. But in no way could you have two rental you could use both. You couldn't use both the main dwelling and the ADU for rental purposes.
So there's a deed restriction paragraph in here too. If you said that it would have to be the owner would have to reside in A or B.
Or say owner, or, and, if, in the case of a leasehold too, whoever the lessor would be of the main property. In other words, it would have to be tied somehow so that you're not renting out both properties to different entities, to two different entities.
You're
I'm
saying
being
they
very
have to be,
eloquent in saying this, I know, but.
the entities have to be related to each other in some way. or,
Right,
yeah,
well, I
have
mean,
some compatible.
trying to keep in
Mhm.
line with the intent that we've been talking about, that kind of generated this, is there some way that we could place limits on the use? You know, again, it's very, given our limitation, it may be very hard to write something that narrow, you know, and, you know, it's always down the road, so the family member, the original family sells the property, and then you have,
Right.
you've got a carriage house, and you've got a,
Right.
you know, equivalent, and you've got a main house, and, you know.
I think there've been, I wouldn't call it a proliferation, but I think other towns, Princeton, Maplewood, come immediately to mind, have adopted ADU ordinances. And I think that it would, in my opinion, it would behoove the council to review some of the other ordinances to see.
We have.
That's what we did, yeah.
We
This
did.
is based on Princeton,
We spoke to
Maplewood.
Maplewood.
We looked at the AARP model
Yeah.
ADU ordinance. I mean, we did a lot of research on this
And
to come up
it
with.
didn't lead to very many ADUs being generated in either town.
Princeton
Right.
has
But are they-
18 in 3 years.
Are they drawn in such a manner that would prevent the type of abuse that we're concerned about?
Well, Princeton allows them, Princeton allows them to be
developer
sold
Bought the house
Separately.
separately.
and condoed it and sold both.
Mm.
The small house was sold for $750,000, and that was affordable in Princeton.
That's affordable in Princeton, yeah.
I'm
you're
serious.
right. No, that's really true.
Yeah, well, that's what because I'm in favor of some sort of way of solving the issues, but I don't think that we can ignore the issue. And I'm just wondering if it's possible, there's some things that are in the ordinance, such as it can't be more than 800 square feet, that it can't be more than 3 rooms in addition to, so that you're controlling the size of it. And if you make that, you cannot separate it into condominiums and sell them separately or whatever, that would take care of a little bit of it, but it doesn't hit at the other issues that we're trying to
Yeah,
still grapple with.
and I agree with you, Carol, but I don't think we can say, if we say we can't dictate ownership, I don't think we can say it can't be made into a condo. If somebody had a 2-family house,
You could make that into a
they could condo it.
I mean, is there a way to approach it from like a fee structure? Where, say, there's an ADU fee, and I was gonna propose like $10,000, but given that properties in Princeton were being sold for $750,000, I mean, hear me out. You know, there's a $500,000 ADU fee, but if you're owner occupied, we waive that fee. So therefore, that owner issue is not part of zoning necessarily, but it's some sort of township fee structure. I don't even know if that's possible.
But then we'd have to carry that down the line. I mean, that would only apply to the initial conversion, right?
Or, no, I would say, and then at time of sale, it's another check, it's another $500,000 fee, or whatever the fee is.
If
But
you're
if you
not
can
owner, that's
prove
an
that
interesting point.
the owner is occupying one of them, or the new owner will be occupying it somehow, some mechanism, could that help solve this problem?
So essentially, it becomes a discount on your certificate of occupancy if you're the owner occupant?
I-
But how
yes,
do you
I-
prove that?
That's an interesting idea.
But how do you prove that? That's the issue. We have that
I'm
issue
not
with our
sure.
affordable
Well,
units.
right now, they have them registering it every year. Then this ordinance, they're saying that every year, that if you don't register, that you're still the owner and you're
Right.
still occupying it, that you'll have a fine, so many, you know, if you don't do it within 30 days, it's so much money, and every day it costs you more. So they're using a fee to make sure that you confirm that you are still the owner and the occupier. There may be some way of doing that through a fee, which you have to continually get waived.
Right, yeah, maybe there's a better structure, but something like that. And it
Right,
just made me,
right.
when Tony said 750,000 for an ADU sale, it made me think, wow. Initially, I was like, maybe 10,000, because that seems crazy high to me, but if you're selling it for 750,000 at a construction cost of, 300-400, 10,000 is nothing.
Yeah, don't know.
So it would be a fee structure for sales of the unit separate.
Somewhere in there, I don't know if it's at the time of sale, the time of construction, CO,
But there's limits on that too. You start going into constitutional issues and.
I'm gonna leave it to the
I think-
attorneys to think about that part, but.
I think we've raised the issue.
I
you
think
know,
that's
And
the-
I think that we brought it to their attention, and with some suggestions, see how they want to proceed.
I
I
mean,
think-
clearly, whatever it is, it's
Yeah.
gonna take more thought.
Janice, do you know what the, what's the timing of this? Is the council going to consider it soon, or?
Well, yes, I think so. They want to do, there's a push to get this done, and I know that the deadline for the planning board is next week to issue the report, the planning board report. So that's kind of why we need to finalize our report.
So would you happen to know the date that they might have the hearing on it?
I don't know offhand when they're going to put it on the agenda.
But it could be the next meeting after.
Yeah, they have to, see,
or
they
do
have to
does this have
publicize,
to be
probably in
noticed?
December, if we finish our report. But I can let everybody know when I'm told it's put on the, because they have to publish, and they haven't published yet for the second reading.
Thank you.
But I'm wondering if our report to them could give them not only the ideas that are summarized, but also where in their ordinance those ideas are a problem, so that they don't have to figure out
Well, I
each
think
of
that's
those
what,
ways.
I think that's what we tried to do here tonight with what the board has in front of them. So if there's anything you want to add to this report, let me know, and then I can finalize it and send it out.
I think our report is excellent in the sense that we've gone through each of those issues and they each have a number. But I think that it would also be helpful if we looked at the ordinance and said, this paragraph is one that's in conflict, and this paragraph is one that's in conflict, so that it's not up to them to find all those things that we as with the help of the zoning board, were able to pick out. So just telling them that there are problems, I think it would be helpful to show them where in the ordinance that they become real issues.
I think we've done a lot of that already. If you look in the ordinance that's attached, and if I can, I said we have, as of tonight, we point out paragraph 1, or item number 1, on page 2, should be eliminated. I think that a lot of this is in there. We've already recommended eliminating the 3 families in the ordinance. And Carmel identified a couple of places where I missed it, and I'll go back and make those changes as well. So what I'm saying is, this is, whatever comments you have, let me know tonight. If there's consensus, because I need to finalize this report and get it to the council.
Well,
This is,
I have some comments if you want to hear them.
yeah.
I'll just run through, because I read this ordinance several times today, and page 3, paragraph 4, detached ADU shall comply with the requirements for accessory structures in the applicable zone and the requirements of Montclair Code 347-22. Now, that's a very defined statute that ordinance. It deals with location of accessory buildings, but also contained in that section of the zoning ordinance, there are issues about height requirements and corner lots.
And those all apply to the accessory structures.
I didn't quite get that.
Everything in that section, 347-22.
Right, everything, but there are other sections, 23 and 24, for example. I didn't write them in, I didn't bring them in here. But they deal with height, and they deal with corner lots.
But that's,
Not in 22.
but that's not for accessory buildings.
It's in the same section of the ordinance. I'm just pointing.
Okay, I'll look into that.
Okay. Page 4, paragraph B at the top, for detached ADUs and ADUs that involve construction of an addition, the application shall be accompanied by a recent survey. What's recent?
It's usually a judgment call on the part of the zoning officer.
Right, but that, it's, to me, it's somewhat arbitrary. I'm just pointing it out.
That's what's in our ordinance right now.
Okay, to me, it's just somewhat arbitrary. So too with paragraph 5. If we're going to eliminate paragraph 5, then the issue of extraordinary circumstances won't apply any longer either. So that's that.
Yep.
Page 5, and this is paragraph B. It starts on page 4. These folks are going to do an inspection, and if they find that the construction complies with the ordinances and the UCC, they'll issue a certificate of occupancy for the ADU. But what if they don't? What's the next step? What is the step?
Then they have to cure whatever, for whatever, just as a building permit, they have to cure for whatever reason they fail.
Well, to my mind, I would want to know what it would say, what they would need to do. So if curing is what it is, I would want the ordinance to say, then you can cure. To me, it's just, it's not the kind of thing. Oh, here's where it was.
Janice, you could say that. You can cure any deficiencies.
That's exactly, that's
Yeah.
what I'm writing.
Yeah, okay.
Good. Here's where I saw it before. Owner's annual affidavit of continued compliance, paragraph 7 on page 5. At the very bottom of subparagraph A, that the owner continues to reside in either the primary residence or the ADU. There's that owner thing again.
Yeah.
Paragraph B, subparagraph B deals with notice. What is the nature of the notice that's being provided to to whomever it's going to be applied to? What is that notice? And then paragraph D, the C of O for the ADU may be reinstated once the required affidavit is filed. What about the unpaid fines? What about the paid fines in that event? And do they get dismissed? I don't understand what happens in that circumstance. And then, the transfer of property lot, paragraph 8A, if the owner in which an ADU is permitted, I didn't quite understand that language myself.
Well, the property is owned by somebody, so the owner,
Same
not
owner?
the, not
Not
whoever.
the original owner?
Well, whoever owns it has to do has to certify every year. And if they transfer the title, the new owner shall have to apply for a certificate of continued use.
Okay, but I think the issue that now that I'm reading it, if the owner in which an ADU is permitted
Yeah,
transfers title to the property, if the owner in which
it
an
has nothing to do with occupancy.
No, I'm just saying it doesn't, if the owner of the property in which an ADU is permitted transfers title.
Okay.
Oh, just answer it, Carol.
I'm quite a character tonight, I really. I'm at a board meeting, hanging up. I'm at a board meeting, I'm hanging up. Goodbye.
then
I'm
the
at a
issue
board
of
meeting, the phone went off, goodbye.
When listing the property for sale with an approved ADU, the owner of the property shall disclose to all prospective buyers. Well, how do you enforce that?
It's gonna be deed restricted. That's what one of the recommendations is that the
Then
the
that-
ADU has all these limitations on it, and it's in the deed.
Okay. If that's the methodology of enforcement, I could, okay. Then,
Well, the concern was that if somebody buys the property and thinks it's a regular apartment without all these other restrictions, they might think a one-family house is actually a two-family house. And the argument is it's not a two-family house. It's an accessory dwelling unit, and it's got all these limitations.
Well,
And it's-
somebody buying the property would do a title search.
That's why we want it in the deed.
Okay. Those are my comments off the cuff that concerned me, so.
Can I ask you a question? This may be a dopey question, but if there's a deed restriction that says there's an ADU on the property, what if the owner wants to take out the ADU? Can they do that if there's already a deed restriction that says there's an ADU on the property?
I would think so, but I'm not an attorney.
Yeah, so if you put in a deed restriction,
Yeah.
that it runs with the property.
Yeah, so they have
you
to
could
keep the
say-
ADU?
If maybe we could put in the deed that the ADU, and explain that it's an accessory dwelling, and it may be eliminated at any time.
Yeah.
I mean, there should be no problem about eliminating an accessory dwelling unit.
There shouldn't be.
But that's
Because
why I think you should be
it-
clear,
It should be
though.
clear in the
Yeah.
restriction. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really in the language of the restriction.
There is presently an ADU on the property, and it
Yeah.
can be removed.
Yeah.
But who gets to remove it?
Who's ever, yeah.
I guess my question is why would you need to remove it from the deed? You just don't use it as an ADU.
But say you want to take out the kitchen and the bathroom and just
You
get rid of it.
Take
That's
out the
I don't-
kitchen
I'm-
and the bathroom.
Right, I'm just asking.
Or what happened with the hurricane where a tree falls on it and you don't want to rebuild it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
You
There's
just
a
don't
fire.
rebuild it.
you don't, if you don't want to rebuild it, you don't want to put another structure there, you just
Yeah.
want to leave it open.
Well, that was
Or
my
you want to have that,
question.
the new location of your pool. You know.
But because it's in the deed, it doesn't restrict you from not, I don't know, I'm asking.
I think it only, really is only of a concern if the structure is there and how you're using it, you know.
Any other comments?
I'm done.
Okay, thank you, Arthur. Do you want to take a motion to amend the report as discussed? And
So
send it
moved.
to the council? Motion by Chair Nguyen, by Carmel.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There any abstentions? Okay, great.
All right.
Janice, are we going to see one more version? Not to comment on, but just for our files or whatever, just to look at?
I'll send it out to everybody.
Yeah, in case you missed
It's not going to be
something.
till next week,
Yeah.
next Monday, but I will send it out to everybody.
All right, and that brings us to new business, application of Aleksander Vargas for 14 Douglas Road.
Evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Alan Tremulak here this evening on behalf of the applicant in this matter, Alexander Vargas. And
Is- Mr. Trembulac, is your mic on? There you go. Beautiful.
You know, sometimes that green light looks like it's actually lit until you press it and then realize it's really not.
This is why they have me on the board, is to ask about microphones.
It's one of his areas of expertise.
Somebody needs to pay attention to those details.
You truly are green. I mean, that's not.
Yep.
So if I might just briefly introduce the application. This is an application for minor subdivision approval involving property that's located at 14 Douglas Road. Property is 100 feet wide. We're seeking to subdivide the property into two lots, one of which would be 52 feet wide, and the other would be 48 feet wide. This is an unusual property in that it's split zoned, and the split zoning results from the fact that the front portion of this property near the street is located in Glen Ridge, and the rear portion of the property is located in Montclair. So because of that, in order to subdivide the property, we need to obtain subdivision approval from both boards, Glen Ridge and Montclair. And there are different zoning regulations that apply in the two towns. The most important one that we're dealing with here is the regulations for lot width. Glen Ridge permits a lot width of 48 feet, which we fully comply with. Montclair requires a lot width of 60 feet, and which we obviously would need a variance from. There are a couple of other variances, which I'll mention in a minute, but the principal issue in this case, I believe, as you'll see, is lot width. As I said, we require approvals from both municipalities. My clients have already applied for and obtained subdivision approval from the Glen Ridge Planning Board, because in Glen Ridge, this was a fully conforming application. It not only met the lot width requirement, but it meets all of the other Glen Ridge requirements, so consequently, as this board knows, it's a fully conforming application, and it basically had to be approved, and it was approved in Glen Ridge. Now, that approval is technically expired because we were unable to file a subdivision deed within 190 days of the approval because we're waiting for this application to be processed and heard this evening. We've already applied for an extension of the 190-day recording requirement, which the municipal land use allows. Glen Ridge has indicated that they'll address that extension after we hopefully are successful obtaining subdivision approval from this board this evening. Under the Montclair zoning ordinance, the property is located in the R1 zone, which again has, and this property, as I guess the majority of R1 properties in town, has a minimum lot width requirement of 60 feet. And as I've indicated, that conflicts with Glen Ridge's requirement of 48 feet. There are two other, what I'll refer to as minor variances that are triggered by the proposed subdivision here. One is a variance from the Montclair regulation, which limits the width of a house to 65% of the lot width. So by reducing the width of the property, we're slightly out of compliance with that 65-foot limitation, which, as I think the board knows, that was really a regulation that was adopted by the town not that long ago to really regulate the size of houses and McMansions, to prevent houses from being extended the full entire permitted building envelope. And of course here we're not looking to increase the size of the house or build a new house. It's just triggered by the fact that we're drawing a subdivision line that brings us out of compliance with that. Similarly, because of the enclosed porch on the property, there's also a deficient side yard setback between the house, the lot with the house, and the newly created lot. Now, as you'll hear from our witnesses, we can very easily eliminate the need for those last two variances by reducing the size of this unenclosed front porch and taking off a few feet of that, which would put us in compliance with the 65% house width limitation, and also would have a fully conforming setback. So as I indicated, the main issue, the main variance in this case, which we're going to be focusing on, is the lot width variance. And I'm preparing to present expert testimony on that issue, as well as the other variance issues from Richard Keller, our professional planner. But before I call Mr. Keller, I would like to first elicit some testimony from my client sitting to my right, Elisa Cuaron.
Can you hear me? Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Would you please raise your right hand?
Yeah.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Would you please state your full name and address for the record?
Elisa Martha Cuaron Hape, 14 Douglas Road, Glen Ridge, New Jersey, 07028.
Before we begin, do you want to mark exhibits like the board normally does at the outset?
Yeah, okay. Just a second. A1 is the application. A2 is the certification of taxes paid. A3 is the proof of publication. A4 is the affidavit of service. A5 is the minor subdivision plat prepared by Richard Hingos, last revised April 24th, 2021. A6 is the front yard setback calculations prepared by Richard Hingos, dated December 20th, 2019. A7 is the planning report dated December 14th, 2021. A8 is the planning report dated August 24th, 2022. A9 is the letter from Mr. Trembulac, including the waiver request stated August 19th, 2022. A10 is the letter received from Robert Simon dated September 12th, 2022. And, Mark, this is a exhibit? Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Okay. Elisa, can you, let's start. Are you one of the owners of the property located at 16 Douglas Road?
I am.
Okay, and you own that property with your husband, Alexander Vargas?
Isn't it 14 Douglas Road?
14.
I'm sorry.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry about that. That's a clerical error that pops up occasionally on this file for some reason. 14 Douglas Road, yes. You own the property with your husband, Alexander Vargas, who's the co-applicant?
Yes, on our daughter.
Okay. How long have you owned the property?
A little over 4 years.
And there's a single-family home on the property?
That's correct.
Okay. And the purpose of this application, what you're seeking from this board, is permission to subdivide the property, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, and as I've already indicated, part of your property is located in Glen Ridge, and you require approval from the Glen Ridge Planning Board in order to subdivide the property, as well as approval from this board.
Yes.
Have you applied to Glen Ridge Planning Board for subdivision approval?
Yes, we have.
And was that approval approved by Glen Ridge?
Yes, it was.
And do you know whether there was opposition from neighbors?
I do, and there was. Yes.
Okay. And a memorializing resolution was adopted. Was that submitted as part of the application submitted to this board? Copy of the Glen Ridge?
Yes. Yes, it was.
Resolution? Okay. That resolution includes a condition that a subdivision deed was to be filed in the county recording office within 190 days of the approval. Has that been done?
No, it has not. It is my understanding that that hinges on the approval with Montclair. Yeah. Is that
You need
correct?
approval from both boards?
Correct.
in
Need
order
approval
to
from both boards,
record the
yes.
deed? Okay. And have you requested an extension of the 190-day time requirement?
Yes, we have.
Okay. Has Glen Ridge decided that?
They have not made a decision yet, no. I think they're waiting for us to get approval from Montclair before moving forward.
Okay. Now, do you know whether your property is located in the Glen Ridge Historic District?
I do, and it is.
Okay. And is it your understanding that because the house is located in the Glen Ridge Historic District, that any new house to be built on the subdivided lot were this application to be approved would have to be approved by the Glen Ridge Historic Preservation Commission?
Yes, I'm fully aware of that.
Okay, and you understand that if you were to sell this property, that anyone who purchased the lot would also be bound by that requirement to obtain HPC approval from Glen Ridge before any new house could be constructed?
Yes, absolutely.
By the way, what is your intention regarding the property if this application is approved?
We actually haven't decided yet. We will either build a new house or we will sell the lot.
Okay. All right, so the existing house on the property is located, I'm going to say to the right, which would be the northerly side of the property, and then there's a undeveloped portion to the on the south side. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Can you just generally describe the condition of that vacant portion of the property that you're seeking to subdivide?
Sure. There's no structures, principal or otherwise. It has some overgrown shrubbery. There's three large caliber trees in the front of the yard, and then a larger one in the rear. I'm actually not entirely certain if we own that tree or not, but it's mostly just vegetation.
Yeah, so you have a tree that's towards the rear of the property that might be on your property, might be on the adjoining neighbor to the rear.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. And then there's three larger trees towards the sidewalk in the front of the house?
Yes, that's correct.
And are those 3 trees in front located on the Glen Ridge portion of the property?
My understanding is they are.
Okay. There's also a street tree that's clearly a Glen Ridge street tree that's between the sidewalk and the curb, is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
but that is, I believe, on the public right-of-way.
Right, right. Do you know if any of those trees in the front, the 3 trees that are on your property located near the sidewalk, would need to be removed in order to construct a new house on what's currently the vacant property and allow for a driveway to be constructed?
I would say at most maybe 1 tree would have to be removed.
Okay. Would it be your intention to remove as few trees as possible?
Absolutely.
Okay. And you believe that at most 1 tree might have to be removed in order to allow for a driveway?
That's correct.
Okay. If this application was to be approved by this board, would you stipulate to a condition that no more than 1 tree would be removed
Sure.
from the property?
Yeah.
Okay. And would you also stipulate to a condition that if you needed to remove 1 tree from the front in order to allow for a driveway to be cut, to be installed on the property, that you would apply to Glen Ridge for the necessary tree removal or tree preservation, pursuant to the Glen Ridge tree removal or tree preservation ordinance?
Of course.
Okay, with regard to the existing house, and I know the board will see some exhibits shortly during Mr. Keller's testimony, there's currently a front porch on the left side or southerly side of the house, is that right?
That's right. It's a wraparound L-shaped porch.
Okay, is the porch enclosed or unenclosed?
It's unenclosed.
Okay. Do you understand that due to the front porch, that if this property were to be subdivided as we're proposing, and this application were to be approved, that would create a nonconformity with regard to the side yard setback on that side of the property?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm aware.
Okay, and are you also aware that if you were to reduce the size of the front porch, take off a few feet, that would result, would then eliminate the non-conforming side yard and would have a fully conforming side yard and not need a variance?
Yes, I am aware. We'd prefer not to do that, but we would if we have to.
You'd be willing to do that?
We'd be willing to do
if
it.
the board required?
Yes, of course.
In order to remove that variance from this application. Okay, and similarly, you understand that another variance that you've applied for is to exceed the Montclair zoning regulation, which provides that the maximum width of a structure cannot exceed 65% of the width of the lot.
Yes, I'm aware of that regulation.
And you're aware that because of the porch, and where the proposed subdivision line is located, that approving the subdivision would also create a nonconformity with regard to the 65%.
Yes.
limitation. You would be in excess of the 65%, which would require a variance relief.
Yes, I'm aware.
And you've applied for that variance as part of this application.
Yes, I have.
Okay. And would removing a portion of the porch that we just mentioned that could be removed in order to eliminate the side yard variance, would the elimination of a portion of the porch also result in eliminating the nonconformity regarding the width of the house?
Yes, modifying the porch would make the project compliant.
Okay, and again, you'd be willing to do that if the board were to require it, as opposed to granting a variance for the maximum width of the house?
Yes, I would.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Questions from the board?
I have a question. You mentioned that the house is subject to the Historic Preservation Act of Glen Ridge, correct?
It is.
Have you touched base with them? If you cut a couple of feet off that porch, are you still compliant with the regulation under historic preservation?
I believe we are, if it's in keeping with the style of the house, yes.
Have you asked them, or are you just guessing?
We're not filing for any permits at the moment to modify the house, so no.
If I can
Yeah.
answer that, I think that probably would require
Yeah,
HPC approval,
Right.
and we'd certainly, would stipulate to that.
right. I mean, I understand that the HBC in Glen Ridge is quite strict, so
Yeah.
what is the, I mean, you'd need that approval. I'd like to see that approval before we would grant a variance for the two variances that you're looking for, to make sure that, I guess, I mean, that this could go through.
Well, but
I
if
mean,
we're
is
granting
that-
the variance, we
Yeah.
don't need them to go because they're not going to be cutting off the porch. It'd only be if we're requiring them to cut off the porch.
Yeah, but that may be something we're thinking about. So therefore, if we require that you cut the porch off, wouldn't you have to go to the, it's,
And then we'd have a condition
okay.
that we'd have to meet.
Yeah.
I want to avoid going back and forth between the boards, as you can
I know,
understand.
yeah,
know.
yeah. Well, I
mean,
just,
we think candidly that the variances there, should be granted, because
of course you do, yeah.
we're gonna have sufficient separation. Well, but the point is, the purpose of the 65% limitation is to prevent bigger houses. The house is already there. And then,
But you're adding another one, yeah.
I understand
yeah.
that, and those houses need to be separated a certain distance,
Yep.
and as you'll hear from our planner,
Yep.
you could have a six-foot setback on both side yard setback on both properties, which means you could be have the houses 12 feet apart.
Hmm.
We're gonna comply with
Yeah,
that
yeah.
requirement. So there's gonna be adequate separation. We're not proposing to enlarge the existing house. It's already there. And again, if the board decides that you'd rather us knock a couple of feet off the front porch, we're prepared to do that, and obviously we'd have to get approval from Glen Ridge.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. I visited the site. You didn't describe this, but it seems like it's sloped. It's sloped from your house into what is the projected site for the new house. There's a different grade in the land. Is that-
Yeah, there is some interesting topography on
Yeah.
the lot. I think there's a drop-off that's near our house, but afterwards it levels out.
Hmm.
And I think, I mean, again, we haven't filed for any permits, we don't have a drawing in front of us, but I would say that that drop-off ends prior to where the setback for the new structure would start.
And are the I guess they're bushes, shrubbery on the left-hand side, are those on your property or the neighbor's property? I'm just trying to get a feel for how
Sure.
big the lot is.
Yeah, it's hard
visually.
to tell
Yeah.
how wide it is, yeah.
Mhm.
I would say of all of that shrubbery, maybe 75% of it, if not more, is on our property.
Okay,
But some of it is on the neighbor's property.
okay.
But I think that raises a good question. Why don't we have a drawing in front of us?
Sorry?
Why don't we have a drawing in front of us that shows those details?
Oh, I think our planner has drawings with him.
Well, we don't have I mean, that's one of the
But nothing was submitted to us.
Details of what?
the trees. the
We're
tree
talking about
plan.
trees, shrubbery, properties,
You say you're not gonna
topography.
you say you're not gonna remove them, but we don't, how do we know what's there if it's
Right.
not on the
Well,
plan?
Well, it's, sorry.
If you want us to show them on the plan, we can. We show pictures, they're very close to there are three in the front that are very close to the sidewalk.
That's why we want it on a plan.
Wait, don't we normally require those to be
Absolutely.
on the plan, Mr. Tremula? So that we can see exactly where things are. I
The
mean, that's not
location, the
that's not an
caliper?
unusual request.
We can provide that information. And Mr. Keller can also address that, but again, I think it's apparent from some of the photos that you'll have that they're not shown exactly on the plan.
Yeah, I agree, it shows them in the photos, but photos are a matter of perspective, and we only have certain photos. So it's hard to say where they're sitting and what the calipers are, that kind of thing. There's a reason why we request it
No,
on
I
the
understand
plan.
that, but this is not a wooded piece of property. There's basically 3 trees in the front and one very far in the back, which would not be impacted.
Which means that it was not that hard to show it on the plan,
Okay. But the point is.
basically. So, we don't have to discuss it any further.
Yeah, okay. I mean, if the board's gonna require that, obviously, we can have the trees plotted.
Also, I think if you're doing a subdivision, you would need a survey showing where the new property line is going to go. And I thought I missed it in the package. So I'm not sure how we could consider a subdivision without,
You have
oh, you do? I'm sorry, no, I missed it then. No, so, okay, so we do have a plan.
We have a plan showing a proposed subdivision line,
We
but
do,
we don't
okay.
have,
We don't have
what
the
we
features.
normally
Got it.
receive, topographic contours, trees, I think there's a few other things.
Yeah, there's a whole list in the planning report about what the completeness issues that are missing, and Mr. Trembulak asked for waivers from all those completeness items.
I just have another question. Does Glen Ridge control the curb cut, since that area would be in Glen Ridge?
I would think so.
Okay, so has Glen Ridge commented on those? There's 3 large trees when I went to look at this site that seem to be right in the way of where you'd put a driveway logically. So has that been looked at by Glen Ridge
Well,
then?
Glen Ridge approved the subdivision.
But did they
And
look at
when
it?
When a plot plan is developed with we're gonna show you the building envelope. And I think Mr. Keller can discuss this a bit. As we said, we might need to remove one of those trees to cut in the driveway. But, I mean, that's, curb cut is certainly, permitted, regulated by Glen Ridge. And as would be any issue regarding the one tree that might have to be removed.
So if Glen Ridge regulates the curb cut, that also would dictate where you can site the house, right?
Well,
I mean, if they say you can't cut down those 3 big trees that are, looks to me.
again, we're not cutting down more than one.
All right, I'm just hypothetically. Glen Ridge
It kind of
dictates.
dictates the shape of the driveway. I think.
Yeah. Yeah,
Not
yeah.
necessarily the house.
That's what I mean, yeah, the driveway.
But where the driveway
Okay.
comes in.
It's possible that the driveway could come
Curve
in
around.
from further to the right
And curve or
allow us to
something.
preserve the
Yeah.
3 trees, which would be our preference.
What happens
Most
if,
one would have to be removed.
and what happens if more than one has to be removed? Would you be willing
We'd
to
have a
replant?
problem. We'd have to come back to you,
Mm.
because we would stipulate to a condition that no more than one would be removed.
Would you be willing to replant? I mean, because if you come back to us, that's probably what we would ask, is that you'd do a replacement.
Well, and this is a tricky thing too, because we're dealing with 2 municipalities. These trees are located in Glen Ridge.
But we don't even know that.
and-
I'm looking
So
at
say you.
Listen, if
'Cause
you
it's
want
not
us to
shown.
plot the trees, we will. I've driven by this property
Well,
a dozen
and we're,
times, because I know the
Mr.
trees are a concern.
Mr. Tremblay, let's not make it any complicated than it needs to be. I mean, you've committed that you're not gonna remove more than one tree.
Right.
But if you have to remove more than one tree, will you replant the tree? I mean, regardless of where that
Yes,
tree is,
sure.
what difference does it make, whether
Whatever's
it's on one
required.
side of the border or the
Yes,
other?
sure.
Okay, we want a nice streetscape. We sure, Glen Ridge wants a nice
Sure.
streetscape too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's,
Right.
okay.
And you also have the HPC there in Glen Ridge, which I think is significant, knowing, how they operate and how concerned. I mean, virtually the entire town is a historic district.
Yeah.
So not much goes on there without HPC.
Yeah, well, if you're willing to commit to not doing more than one tree, if you need to do 2, it's not a stretch to say, okay, we'll put another tree back.
Sure, yeah,
So,
but we don't think that would be necessary, but we'd
Hopefully-
be happy to
hopefully it
agree to
won't.
that. Okay.
Other questions from the board?
I have a question. What would be the permitted width of the new house?
You probably have to turn on your microphone.
Right?
I can't
Sorry.
slack off on my job, I'm sorry.
What would be the maximum width of the new house remaining compliant to the 65%
The new house.
with requirement.
Well, it would
So
have
you
to
have a
be-
48-foot lot, and if you have a 10-foot setback and a 6-foot setback, what do, I think you have 32 feet.
You're going to have testimony about the building envelope?
And Richard, one of Mr. Keller's exhibits will show you exactly where the building envelope would be.
So why don't we hold off until we get that? That should address it. I believe we have counsel representing property owners. And counsel wish to ask questions of this witness. Okay. Do any members of the public wish to ask questions of this witness? Okay, Mr. Tremullet.
Okay, thank you. I'll call my next witness, Richard Keller. You can sit down in the first.
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Sir, do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Would you please state your full name and business affiliation for the record?
My name is Richard Keller, K-E-L-L-E-R, and I am a partner with the firm of Casey and Keller, located in Millburn, New Jersey.
Mr. Keller, I know you've testified before this board in the past, but I think it's probably been a while. So why don't you begin by describing your educational background and your professional qualifications for the board.
Certainly, yeah. I think certainly pre-pandemic was the last time I was here. I'm a licensed professional engineer and planner in the state of New Jersey, licensed as an engineer in 1989 and as a planner in 1990. I hold a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Rutgers University with a declared concentration in water resources and environmental engineering. And I also hold a master's degree in architecture with a concentration in urban planning and design, and that is from the New Jersey Institute of Technology, where I was also an adjunct professor in both undergraduate and graduate divisions for approximately 11 years. I've appeared before approximately 100 boards through the state of New Jersey, a little more than 100, as both planner and engineer. I have been the Planning Board and Board of Adjustment engineer in the Township of Long Hill, and I provided planning services to the Board of Adjustment in the Borough of Caldwell. I just completed another 14 hours of credits, so my license is in good standing, and it's a pleasure to be back before this board.
Yeah. Your licenses, both as a professional planner and professional engineer, are active and in good standing?
That's correct.
Okay. So, Chairman, I'd like to have Mr. Keller qualified both as a planner and an engineer, and primarily going to provide planning testimony, but some of the issues we've been talking about, I think, involve engineering expertise in terms of situating the house and the matters of that. So I'd like him qualified as both.
I don't see how we can refuse those credentials.
Okay.
Thank you. Hopefully you'll still think that at the end of my testimony.
Mr. Keller, were you retained by the applicants to provide your professional opinion regarding this application, and particularly with regard to the variances that are being sought as part of this subdivision?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. And before you begin, can you tell the board what you've done and what you've reviewed in preparation for your testimony this evening?
Certainly. I reviewed the subdivision plan that was prepared by Richard Hingos, as well as the average setback exhibit, also prepared by Mr. Hingos' office. I reviewed the review letters provided by the township. I've also reviewed your zoning ordinance, your master plan, and I've been to the site at least 3 or 4 times in the surrounding neighborhood.
Okay, and I know you've brought exhibits with you this evening, and perhaps maybe before you begin your presentation, your discussion of the application, the issues, that maybe we should have those marked.
Certainly. And what are we up to, A13?
We're on
A11.
A11.
So I'm going to start with A5, which has already been marked in, and then I will have A11 will be a photo board. It contains 4 photographs and the photographs are dated September 9th, as well as a Google Street View from 2020. And I'll explain a little more as when I introduce that exhibit before you. I also have a tax map exhibit and an annotated tax map exhibit where I've annotated the Borough of Glen Ridge tax map to show lot widths on Douglas and the surrounding streetscape.
We'll call that A12.
A12, correct. And then I also have a setback exhibit on which I've taken the Hingo's average setback exhibit, and I've annotated that with some dimensions between the houses on our property and surrounding houses, done some lot width, some building width to lot width calculations, and annotated that, and that would be the A13 then.
Do you have hard copies of those? I know you're...
I have reduced copies, which I can give to the board tonight, and I have full size. In case the technology didn't work, I brought them full size as well, so I can leave them with the board.
Can I have the small, for the file?
Yeah, I might want to look at them while I'm testifying.
Absolutely, when
And
you're done.
afterwards, certainly.
I mean, I've got them.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Keller, you want to, I guess, begin where you usually begin, talking about the application and the subject property, as well as the neighborhood, and then move on to discuss the relief sought, particularly the variances.
Certainly, and I think the A5, which was the subdivision plat, is up on the screen, and
The zoom, sir, it's at the top, the little
Plus.
the little plus and minus at the
yeah,
top.
that's like the zoom feature, but okay, we'll do plus. And so if we go down to the lower portion of the sheet that was,
We'll have to get you on a microphone, whether it's
Yep.
the wireless that's right behind you. Yep, there you go. Should be on the side, I believe.
he had longer nails. The property in question is just under 15,000 square feet, 14,843 square feet. It's located about 288 feet north from the intersection of Douglas Road with Washington. It's alternately called Washington Avenue and Washington Road, depending on which town you're in. That's about 288 feet to the northeast. The property does contain a 2.5-story wood single-family dwelling with a detached one-car garage in the back. The house dates back to about 1907, so it certainly is an older house and certainly worthy of being on the under Glen Ridge's Historic Preservation Commission auspices and control. If I can, the house, actually I'm going to go to the photo board for a second, and we'll come back to the subdivision. I'm going to go to photo board number 1, and if I go to again, photo board number 1, all photos except as noted are taken by Casey and Keller, myself, on September 8th, 2022 at approximately 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And all of the photos, I think, do accurately represent the site as it exists today. I started at the top left with the Google Street View because that was the same day and the same view that was in Ms. Talley's report, although it didn't look to the left, and I purposely wanted to show a couple of changes since 2020. First of all, 2 of the trees in the front of the house, an evergreen and a deciduous tree, both have come down. They had structural issues and they were recommended removal by an arborist. So the 2 trees just to the what appear to be just to the left of the house are actually quite a bit further forward towards the street. Those are already down. And then there are another four trees, one street tree between the sidewalk and curb, and there are 3 other trees on the property. That exist. So there's one. There's another one that's right behind. The larger one is a tulip tree. There's another tree that is just to the left and further back behind the tulip, but it's eclipsed by the street tree. And there's another tree that's very close proximity to the property line. As indicated, in looking at where a driveway will be threaded through there, the applicant is fairly certain, I think we are too, that we would only need to take down one tree. Obviously, we would like it to not be the tulip, but we would have all the trees looked at by an arborist and assess the health and the structural health of those trees and make that decision as to how to bring a driveway through, whether we biased it to the right and kept the driveway on the right, or we came in on the left. But there seems to be enough, and there's not a whole lot of change of grade, so that we believe we can get a driveway to service a new lot if the board were to approve this property. So the going down to the next photo off to the right is you can see there's the street tree. This is from September 8th. There's the town street tree. There's a large tulip, probably 24 inches in diameter. There's the 16 to 18 inch diameter tree to the left of it, and just out of the view, very close to the property line, is that 4th tree. Obviously, we understand that there are tree replacement ordinances in both Montclair and in Glen Ridge, and the applicant has indicated that they would meet the requirements of both towns in terms of replacement. So if trees are of poor quality, structural quality, if we take one down to get the driveway in, we would certainly look to replace it within the requirements of both the Glen Ridge and the Township of Montclair zoning ordinance.
We don't know whether they're the same.
I don't see they're the same. Your ordinance is a little more clear in stipulating the replacement and the cost. I see the cost as it relates to street trees in the Glen Ridge. So assuming yours might be a little more stringent, we'd meet both of them.
You'd meet the more stringent one.
We'd meet both of them, yes. So we'd meet the more stringent, which would of course then meet the lesser stringent.
Were the other 2 trees replaced that were removed?
I don't know the answer to that. I have to go back and ask the owner of the property, since they came down because for structural and safety reasons, but I don't know that they were replaced.
So
I know that there are some smaller specimen trees that are, I don't know how new they are, but there are other trees in the property, and certainly the applicant has no problem in replacing and providing additional trees.
So an arborist determined that those 2 trees were not safe and sound.
Yes.
But the arborist didn't check any of the other trees on the lot?
I don't know. We'd have to go back to the owner to find out what the status of the other trees were. And I was not a part of that, but I was told that the first 2 trees had to come down for safety and structural reasons. The last photograph number 4, is the side yard of the property in question, and now we're standing sort of on what we think would be the new property, and we're looking out towards Douglas Road, and you can see that there are the trees in the front and the vegetation along the right. Unfortunately, it's not very clear. A lot of those shrubs are actually non-native invasive species. Japanese knotwood, there's some, looked like there might have been some burning bush there. So certainly some of this material, the material in the foreground, a lot of that is just overgrown secondary growth, and that would be removed. And that is not within the guidelines of the tree removal ordinance. Obviously, anyone who would be coming in to build a home, whether it was the applicant was going to build a home for themselves and occupy the site, or it was to be sold and developed, obviously anyone in this neighborhood is going to come back with a foundation landscape plan, want to put some additional trees in. So in addition to whatever we would be obligated to put in per the 2 township ordinances, I'm sure that a lot of this perimeter or the perimeter plantings would sort of be replaced as part of any development. But we don't have a development plan because we don't have a house, so there's none to show. But it's really, we're seeking approval of the subdivision, recognizing that you have building department requirements, you have engineering department requirements, tree removal and replacement requirements. All of those, of course, we would meet as a condition of any approval, because we'd have to anyways. If I go back to the, let's go to the, where to go? I'm not finding my original, and that's my photo board. There we go. Okay, so it wasn't my copy. All right, so the, as indicated, the house was, well, the house, I think I showed it to you. The house actually has that wraparound porch. I'll go back very quickly. One of the things I think is important to notice about that, because it's the porch that extends over the lawn, and it is too close to the property line, which was set at 48 feet to be consistent with the Glenridge requirements. That porch comes in at about 2.65 feet off of the proposed property line. As indicated, the applicant has indicated they are willing to modify that porch, either removing a portion of it, fireproofing it, whatever they would need to meet building and local codes. And if they want, if the board wanted us to reduce it, we would. It certainly could be done in keeping with the character of the house. We actually like the wraparound nature of it. I think it adds a little more authenticity to the 1907 era. But I would point out, one of the things is, since it is an open porch, it's open, it's not as though it's a solid mass. So when we talk about the house, it exceeds that allowable width for the zone, for the lot width. The house exceeds the allowable width based upon the lot width. It is really this open sort of diaphanous space, this porch, that causes the violation. And so it could be removed, but I think the impact is far less than if that was an enclosed porch or a solid portion of the home, because you can see right through it, as is evidenced on photograph number 3. So if we go back to the property, what is unique about this property is that it is split, not split zoning between 2 different zones, but it is split between 2 different municipalities in 2 different zones, which is somewhat unique in any town. The entire frontage, along Douglas Road, coming back at least some 25 to 30 feet, and extending to a distance of approximately approximately 48 feet on the right side. The entire front lawn, or most of the front yard forward of the house, is located in the borough of Glen Ridge. There's the property line. Everything behind that is in the township of Montclair. So the rear is located, as indicated, in the R1 one-family zone district, and on the front being located in the R3 zone of R3 residential zone in Glen Ridge. As indicated, the subdivision was fully conforming to the requirements of Glen Ridge, both in terms of all the setbacks, the lot width, the lot area, all fully conforming, and that's why it was obviously approved. The proposal, and what we're proposing today is a subdivision only, so that there is no engineering. We've looked at the site. It's relatively flat. While the yard is a little bit lower than the existing house, there's nothing that indicates we can't get a drainage system on that property to adequately handle stormwater management in a manner that's consistent with development on any conforming lot, as well as meeting all of the other requirements for the building permits, etc. So no house has been designed, no engineering is proposed. Again, recognizing if approved, will satisfy all the needs for a building permit, tree replacement plan, etc. So if we look at the variances needed, we're clearly in excess of the minimum lot area. well, there is no actually minimum lot area, but we're at 7,200 square feet and 7,600 square feet respectively on the two properties. We're proposing a 48-foot wide lot on the left. There is a, the right side is actually 50.75, because the lot actually opens up. When you get into the back, it actually is wider by a few feet. So but the front would be 50.75, and on the right, and 48 feet on the left. So we need variance relief for both of those under section 347-18D. Also as indicated, and I'm going to go in exhibit in a second, or I'll show a little more when I get to the proofs in a second. But with regard to the setbacks on the lot on the right, which would be lot 22.02. Sorry, lot left, which would be 22.01. We have a 10.91 setback in the front, on the back, on the right side, and the left side to the main body of the house is 7.23. To the front is 2.65, and I'll show that in a few minutes. So we need a setback on the left side to the porch. Obviously, to the main body of the house, we exceed the 6 feet. On the left, we exceed the 10-foot requirement on the right. So our house certainly conforms. It's the wraparound porch that causes the violation of 2.65 feet. And I'll go into an exhibit that I think a little better explains our position in the neighborhood in a second. So we need a variance from section 347-45C1 as it relates to the minimum side yard setback, that being to the porch. And then, in fact, maybe what I'll do is I'll go out of order. I'm going to go to the setback exhibit. Setback exhibit, as I indicated, was where we took the Ingo's average setback for the block, and we modified it to be to show some additional information. So if we
And we haven't seen this before tonight, right?
No, this is new.
Okay.
So 14 Douglas is obviously, that's the photograph in the winter where this was originally made. If we come down to you have seen the background to this drawing, but you haven't seen any of the handwritten font that's on here. It's hard to see, but any of the handwritten font, anything that's in red are dimensions that we added. We had a CAD file and a scalable PDF, so we added some dimensions to show. What we've done is we've superimposed the required setbacks for the buildable envelopes for the properties, and you can see one of the questions that came up before is when you put we look at the front setback, you normally have a requirement of 6 feet and 10 feet. To actually meet that proposed structure to width of lot, you need to have a total of 16.8 feet of setback, not 10 and 6. So one side would have to be 0.8 feet larger. So we've indicated the Montclair required setbacks to meet that lot width, structure to lot width ratio would be 6.8 and 10. It could also be 6 and 10.8, either way. You'll see that between the properties, here's the 2.65 dimension showing the porch offset. We need a variance for that. We also need a variance because we exceed the allowable combined side yard for the property. And so here we've got 2.65. You can see we've got the 10.91 on the right, which remains. What I thought was particularly helpful to see is that the distance between the buildable envelope and the main part of the house will be 17.23 feet. And where the porch is, you'll still have 12.65 feet. So in a zone that allows houses to be, regardless of the width, to be 6 feet apart, you'd expect to see at least 12 feet between the houses. We have 12.65, and if we were to bias that over and slide this over to 0.8, we'd actually go up to 13.45 feet between the house and the proposed building envelope. So any proposed house on the new lot on the left would certainly be consistent with the zoning ordinance in terms of the separation between the houses, and I think that's further borne out on the block. If we look at other distances in the block, you'll see that between our existing house at 14 Glen and the house next to us at 16 Glen, there's 22 feet between us at the front. Actually, there's a 2-foot jog, so it gets smaller, but you've got 22 feet at that point. You've got 18.2 feet between the next two, 17.3. So those are all consistent with the 17.23 that we have between our house and the main one. But what's important to see is that the 12.65 feet between the building envelope on the left and the existing porch on the right meets the 12-foot setback requirement. We also took a look at the existing structure width to lot ratio. We looked at the house immediately to the right at 16, and we see that that is actually doesn't quite, it's a little bit over at 68.0%, where 65% is required. The next lot over, that being lot 8, street number 18, that has an existing structure width to lot of 72.3, so significantly over the 65%. The next one at 20 actually squeaks in just compliant at 64.5. The point being that within the neighborhood, the proposed 73.3% is not atypical to the neighborhood. And if we were to remove the porch, we would be down at 64.3. We think there's really no negative impact from keeping that porch on, and we're going to request that you allow us to keep it. And then, of course, to the left, when you see a lot that's nearly 100 feet and the house is biased to the right, you kind of wonder what was going back in 1907. It almost looks as though it was always built or purchased as a buildable lot, and that's why the house was biased to the right. We have no evidence of that, but as you move into the lots that are more significantly in the township of Montclair, the lots get to be much bigger, and the houses are centered in the lot as though they were really always meant to occupy the full property. The subject property, certainly when you see a house biased off to the right, it leads us to think that there was probably the intent that they bought the additional lot with the hopes of developing it someday, and here we are 115 years later wondering what they were thinking. With regard to the variance proofs, I actually want to go into the
Before you navigate away from that
Yep.
slide, was that marked into evidence?
Yep, that was
What was the?
13.
A13.
13.
A13, correct. The last exhibit I'm going to go back to is the this is the Glenridge annotated tax map, and it shows the lots along Douglas Road on both sides, and in the blue color are lots that are 50 feet or less, recalling that the allowance in Glenridge is that they have to have a minimum of 48 feet. The lots that are green are between 51 and just under 60 feet, and then, which is 60 feet being the Montclair requirement, and the lots that are not shaded are the lots that exceed 60 feet. I would point out on this exhibit, there are only 3, and ours counting 4 lots out of 36 that are under the control of Montclair in terms of the lot width. Obviously, these are already subdivided. But when we talk about the character of Douglas Road, it's clearly 32 out of the 36 dwellings on that block are what define the character of Douglas Road, and they are under the auspices of the Borough of Glenridge zoning ordinance. And you can see that except for one, lot 11 that comes in at 47 feet, every one of these lots that fronts on Douglas Road is fully conforming to the Glenridge zoning ordinance. every one of them in terms of lot width anyways. So that our lot's at 48. We're certainly not the smallest on the block. There's one at 47, but we are 48. We are what's permitted under code. You can see all the other blue lots are coming in either at just under they're between 47 and 50 feet. So you can see that most of the rest of the block is certainly developed with 50-foot lots, and certainly we're not looking to change the character of that road. The lot width deviation we see as a C1 variance, where we do have an unusual or an exceptional situation that affects our property. That's probably unique to most in the town, is that we're in 2 zones. So we obviously have a frontage, which is defined by the character of Douglas Road, which is in the borough of Glen Ridge, and then we've got, but the property, the back half of back 2/3 of the property, or maybe a little more, are actually located in Montclair, and so where we don't meet the ordinance requirements is really in the lot width, and it backs into other properties that front on the street behind us. So that when you look down Douglas Road, whether you're 48, 50 feet, I don't think you'll see you won't be able to see any difference between our property and most of the rest of the houses on that block. Certainly after you come back past the first 2 large houses on the left side of Douglas, everything is pretty much a relatively similar vintage, and most of them, as you can see, all the blue lots are 50-foot lots. By reason of what we consider to be an unusual or an exceptional situation uniquely affecting this piece of property, we believe that the strict application of the zoning ordinance would present a peculiar and exceptional practical difficulty to the developer of this property. Certainly, the character is Glen Ridge. It feels like it's in Glen Ridge. We're consistent with Glen Ridge. We're keeping the character of Glen Ridge, and certainly to have us required to be a larger standard, I think, is an undue practical difficulty on the owners of this property. And as I said, of the 36 houses, 32 are defined by the Glen Ridge zoning ordinance. The individual side yard and maximum structure width of the as a percentage of lot width, that is a C2 variance. And we believe that this is a C2 flexible variance, the flexible variance being where the proposed plan with the deviation represents a better planning alternative than a conforming one. And this relates to, as I said, the individual side yard and the maximum structure width, where we think that it is a better opportunity to keep the existing house with the existing 1907 porch exactly as it is, rather than removing either a portion or a significant portion of that to come down and comply with both sections of the ordinance. We think it's historically more appropriate. Obviously, Glen Ridge has yet to weigh in on that, but it's more in keeping with the character of the neighborhood to keep that 1907 porch. The purposes of the Land Use Act that are advanced through these deviations, one is the conservation of historic sites and districts. Obviously, we're not in one of the township of Montclair historic districts, and I think we're probably not, because I think in any of the 3 either your historic ordinance or the 1982 analysis, or any of the ordinances relating to historic preservation, I think that the belief was probably this is covered by Glen Ridge, which has a pretty robust historic preservation requirement, and that it's really not even part of the township in terms of its character. So certainly we're promoting the conservation of an historic site and district, and also we are providing we're providing a sufficient space for a variety of different housing typologies, obviously, or at least in terms of size. Because obviously when you have a smaller lot, you have a slightly smaller house. So we're not providing low and moderate income housing, but you are providing a house that's going to be a little smaller than some of the larger ones in the neighborhood, and that provides it for a variety of housing types that may be a little smaller, fewer bedrooms, which provides, again, for a balance of different sizes of the houses. We also advance general welfare in that the project is consistent with the state's development and redevelopment plan. It provides the opportunity for quality housing stock in a region, in the PA1 region, where there is existing infrastructure and access to public transit. We're about 4 blocks from the DeCamp bus line, which either goes into Newark or goes back up to the train stations. You're also at the end of Douglas onto Franklin. You're about 3 blocks to the Jitney, and you're also, Lincoln, and you're also a short bicycle ride from the Bay Street station. So certainly it advances the general welfare through advancement of the state's master plan. Obviously, for any application, we need to show that it meets the negative criteria appearing in 2 prongs. First, that there's no substantial detriment to the public good, and secondly, that there's no substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of your master plan and zoning ordinance. With regard to the public good, we certainly don't see any negative to the public good. We think the trees can be mitigated. You've got an ordinance to protect that. When we go and when they design a house, there'll be a grading plan that'll meet all the engineering requirements to keep everyone safe in terms of drainage. We're limiting some non-native invasive species on the property. We've made a commitment to take down only 1 tree of the 3 that are on the property in the front. With regard to the public good, zoning is about generally, and it's throughout your master plan, preserving the character of the neighborhoods. In this case, the neighborhood is a Glen Ridge neighborhood where the proposed subdivision is completely conforming. With the exception of 3 variances requested, the applicant agrees that all of the Montclair criteria will be met, including rear yard, front yard, and side yard setbacks. The property is located, as I said, in the borough of Glen Ridge Historic District, and any new home or modifications to the existing home will require their review and approval. The purpose of the maximum lot restriction is to prevent the development of overly wide dwellings that may dominate the streetscape. The portion of the existing dwelling that is creating the need for the variance relief is covered but open porch. So again, you've got visibility through it, transparency. If the lot were 60 foot wide, the maximum permitted house width would be 39 feet. And it could be as close to as 12 feet to the neighboring house. The existing dwelling with the open porch actually is 37.19 feet wide. So it's actually 1.8 feet smaller than if we had a 60-foot lot. So the house will automatically be smaller than what would be permitted if it was a 60-foot lot, and will have between 12.65 and 13.45 from the closest part of any new dwelling to the next dwelling, rather than the minimum of 12 feet. So certainly, we don't think that it's inconsistent with the intent of your master plan. There's no degradation in the enjoyment of air, light, and open space to either our neighbor to the left, certainly, or to between the 2 houses we're creating, and certainly not to the house to the right. So we think that there's really no substantial detriment, and certainly whatever detriment there is in the temporary. I live in a neighborhood where there's been a lot of new construction. New construction is always a little disruptive, but it's temporary, and it goes away, and then we have a nice new house on the block that would be designed consistent with HPC requirements. We think that certainly the benefits substantially outweigh any temporary detriments associated with the construction of a new home, with the subdivision and resulting construction. And we think there's no detriment to the intent and purpose of the master plan. Your master plan repeatedly goes through issues that talk about preserving the character of the neighborhood under big ideas. This is the most recent May 2015 master plan, which is amended through June 2021. And I got to say, I've always been really amazed at Montclair that you guys stay on top of these master plans so much more than other towns. You get a master plan and you tinker with it 2 years later. You don't wait 10 years. Keeps us in the professionals, keeps us jumping to see what the latest version is. But it's a lot of work. I've worked on one in Milburn. I've worked on one in South Orange. It's a lot of work, and I got to say that you guys review it and update it so often is a credit. But repeatedly, in fact, in the in the big five ideas, one of them was to, one of the big ideas of the five was to implement zoning revisions and new laws to allow increased density and an improved built environment. So certainly, we're talking about a densification. We're adding a lot. It's fully consistent with the borough of Glen Ridge, and we're infilling a lot, which is really consistent with the state master plan. And we are certainly conserving the neighborhood form and character through keeping the existing house with as few changes as possible, and the new house will certainly be designed under their auspices. Under neighborhood character, one of the complaints by many of the citizens that new construction in the residential neighborhoods is out of character. Certainly there's controls here because it has to go through HPC. A number of the different sections throughout your ordinance talk about sort of conserving the character of the neighborhood and allowing for infill development. Also under 2.4, under flexible affordable lifestyles, community identified issues, there wasn't enough diversity in the terms of types and price ranges of houses available in Montclair. Not saying this is low and moderate, but it certainly is a smaller house. It's going to be somewhat more affordable than the houses that may be around the block where you've got a 60, 70, 80, 100-foot wide lot in the same zone. The Montclair, one of the recommendations was that Montclair should aim to provide a mix of housing that works for smaller house sizes as well as non-family households. So certainly we are, if this board would approve it, at the 48-foot width, again, conforming with Glen Ridge, it would really be providing a house that is slightly smaller than would be on the surrounding blocks. I will also say that your master plan also recognizes the surrounding zoning in different towns and HPC regulations, and it also does point out that your master plan seeks to be consistent with the state strategic plan, the 2014 plan, that ensured that one of the goals is to ensure strategies that include for growth that include preservation of the state's critical natural resources. Essentially, what the state master plan is looking to do, as with the 2004, is to encourage infill developments where you've got existing infrastructure, so that we don't go out and build houses out in the highlands and out in the other parts of the state. The PA1, which is where Montclair proudly sits, is where we want to look at to put this infill development to meet the needs of housing in the state of New Jersey and not lose resources by going out west. So certainly, I think that this project is consistent with the master plan, and we think that it meets the criteria for the 3 variances requested under both C1 and C2, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
One follow-up question before Richard. You know, the applicant has indicated a willingness to remove a portion of the porch in order to eliminate the 2 variances for side yard setback and the width of the house. How much of the porch would need to be removed in order to eliminate those 2 variances and leave only 1 variance for lot width?
I can double check. I think we'd need to remove approximately 3 to 3.5 feet, I believe. If you give me a second, I can give you the exact number.
Sure. So I thought you indicated that 39-foot lot house width would be permitted.
That's on the new lot.
I'm sorry.
On the new lot, you're allowed to be 48.65. You're allowed to be 30. Sorry, my calculator is closed. Hold on 1 second. So 48 feet, point. So the house could be 31.2 feet for the new lot. For the 50.75, House can be just a hair, 32.99, just for now we'll round it up to 33 feet. And so we've got 310.91 minus. So we'd actually have to remove 4.21 feet of the proposed house. Of the proposed of the existing porch, excuse me. So from the porch, we'd have to remove 4.21 feet, and that would make us fully compliant with the 65-foot, 65% that is required. If we removed the entire porch, then we would be at 64.3%. So just over 4 feet.
If I'm reading this correctly, you, with the porch in the current location, the setback is 2.65, and the requirement would be 6,
But you need more than that.
which would,
Hold on, 50.75, which means that it's 0.65 times. $17.76 is required. Combined the two side yard setbacks would have to combine to be 17.76 feet. We've got 10.91 on the right, so that leaves 6.85 is required on the left. And then we've got 2.65 now, so if we took that off, that's 4.2 feet.
okay. Just wanted to get in the record how much of the porch would need to be removed in order to eliminate those two variances.
So that'd be 4.2 feet, right?
4.2 feet.
Okay,
Has to come off the porch.
right.
That would be from the side or from the front? Where would you measure that from?
From the left side of the house. So
It's really hard to tell from that angle.
Yep.
Mhm.
So from this edge right in here, you'd have to cut back 4.2 feet. So from this edge right here is 2.65 feet off the proposed line. It needs to come back another 4.2 feet off of that.
So you would still have the porch in the front,
Still,
it's just the side would
and
be-
you still have a portion in the front, and you still have a small bit on the side,
Right.
but not the full amount. You probably want to re-space those columns in the front to be something more logical. But yeah, you would still have the porch around the front. You would be modifying the roof line to rebuild that entire roof to come down to be something that was 4 feet less.
It would actually be slightly to the left of the protruding bay window that's in
Just
the back
slightly,
there.
yep.
Just
Mhm.
slightly.
Just slightly.
Over.
It's not, unfortunately, I'm not quite in line, but yeah, I'm not completely orthogonal to that bump.
Right.
But it'd be just beyond, a little bit beyond that wall right there. So, again, I think there's a little perspective here. So I think from this perspective, it would appear to be probably right through the window sash of that window. They'd be taking that much off right there.
No further questions.
Questions from the board?
I have one question.
Carol,
Looking at
can you turn on your microphone, please?
I wish I had a remote. Like, if I just had a remote, I could turn people's on and off from here, it'd be easier.
Of the physical structures of the houses, I know that most of the lot is in Montclair from looking at the diagram. Of the buildings, the actual buildings, what % of the buildings themselves are in Montclair?
Virtually, there's a small portion of the porch, so I'd say probably more than 90% of both houses. 90% of the house, existing house, is in Montclair. Mostly, it's just a portion of the covered porch on the existing house of 14, that is into Glen Ridge. And on the proposed dwelling, the house itself would sit entirely in Montclair. Now, I'm basing that upon the surveyor's approximated municipal boundary line. Municipal boundary lines are much harder to establish than title lines. So I don't know, it's possible that line could be a little further back, could be a little closer. It's listed as being an approximate location. I think it's fairly consistent with the tax maps from both towns, but I would say, as I said, 90 to 95% of the building on the existing house and all of the proposed house are in Montclair. That's why we would need building permits from Montclair, have to meet all of the
Okay, and one more question. With regard to the address when it's recited, is it recited as to be Montclair, New Jersey, or Glen Ridge, New Jersey?
Well, you know, for tax purposes,
When you recite the address, so you say, well, I live at
yeah,
14
well,
Douglas Road, is it Glen Ridge, New Jersey, or Montclair, New Jersey?
it's
Glen
interesting.
Ridge.
It's Glen Ridge.
That's what I thought, yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Interesting, okay.
Other questions from the board?
I have a quick question. If you go back to the survey, Rich, is there, and go to the back of the property for where the existing house is? Yeah, you see how the curb line for the driveway extends onto the adjoining property? Is there an encroachment there or an agreement?
Yeah, I believe that actually this is the edge.
That's the property line, right?
No, the property line is right through here.
Right, and then
Straight.
the curb line,
There's the shaded area is the paved area. And so I believe there's a curb on the neighbors that, in other words, the area that's between, and the area I'm pointing, I think that's a lawn area.
okay, okay. It's hard to tell.
Yeah, it
Thanks.
is.
In your figure that showed lot widths in the neighborhood, did you take a look at the lot widths that are on the back side of this property?
Yeah, there's, in fact, I think one of the objectors lives just behind us on a 100 or 110 foot wide lot where there's about a 7 foot overlap to our property.
7 foot overlap? What do you
Yeah,
mean by that?
in other words, there's a property line that comes down and it hits the dividing line between the houses that front on the back street to the ones here.
So it's not directly behind, it's opposite.
Yeah. So the properties up front on Franklin, which is to the northwest, they don't obviously line up with the back. So there's a property line that comes down and it hits the common dividing line between the two facing properties. It's about 7 feet into us, 7.7 feet, I think, into us here. And then there's a narrow lot behind us. There are variegated sizes behind us. We didn't take a close look at the lots that are behind us because, again, we think the character of the lot is really established by the Douglas Road. And I think if we take a look at the subdivision plat, I think I've lost some of those images on this drawing. Because there is a tax map. It's sort of hard to read. It's in the it's on your drawing. The A8, I think it was.
The zoning map?
The zoning map.
Yeah, Keith, you can see it on Janice's cover.
Oh yeah, Janice's memo.
Yeah.
So if you look at Ms. Talley's, that's December 14th. Let me grab the newer one. If we look at the Ms. Talley's report dated August 24th, you can see in blue is the subject property. Right behind us is a 60-foot wide lot at 42 Franklin, and then immediately to the left of that, where the the property comes in, there's a 105-foot wide lot with about a 7.7-foot overlap, where a little bit of it comes behind us, but for the most part, the property that's behind us is 42 Franklin, as well as 40 Franklin, lots 15 and 14 as shown on this map. So
And-
the lots on Franklin Place, they are variegated. There's a number of them that are way under 50 feet. There's a number of them 50 feet, and there's a lot of them that are 60 feet and larger. So the Franklin really is a Montclair street, and with a minimum 60 foot. Although in those blocks, there's probably all those blocks surrounding us have a 60-foot lot width requirement, and there are a number that are smaller, larger, but you do get a number of lots that go well above the 60-foot, as is evidenced by Ms. Talley's partial tax map of 75, 108, 66, 100, and you can see 50. So they're variegated across the street. On the other side of Franklin, you see 52.5, 42.27, 47 feet. So the lot widths vary quite a bit on Franklin as well, but the Franklin Place, but there are a lot of lots that are oversized too.
So you're saying there are different neighborhoods between Franklin and Montclair and Douglas and Glen Ridge?
Yeah, it's around the block, but sometimes neighborhoods do change. And one was developed under Glen Ridge standards, and it acts like a Glen Ridge street. And the lot behind is pretty variegated, but I think that there was a 60-foot overlay because there was a variety of much larger and smaller houses, and they probably looked at maybe 8 or 10 blocks as an average and decided what the zoning should be there. And by being on that block, we had to be on the back half of it. So yeah, I think it's a different character when you drive down that street. Look at all the houses right across the street from us. They're all very elegant, very well maintained, beautiful homes from that same era that are all in 50-foot wide lots. And I don't think you can see the difference between, I've been doing this since I was 14. I can't see the difference driving down the street between a 48-foot lot and a 50-foot lot. And so most of the lots all across the street from us are almost all 50-foot lots. And it is a different character between Franklin Place and Douglas.
And with one of your argument, when you were talking about the C1 hardship argument, I was having a little trouble following all of it. Were you making the argument that it's difficult to follow zoning in two municipalities?
Yeah, exactly. It's a unique condition in that it has zoning in 2 zones. And so the one that you front on, the one you call your address, the one that all the houses are across the street from you and further up the street, that's the zoning that sort of makes sense would be applied here. But you know, you've got when you've got lots that are in 2 zones, or you have lots where the back half is in one town, front's another. Sometimes you look at, and land use law says, you look at the rear yard setback would be appropriate for Montclair because we are abutting a rear yard from another property, whereas the front yard setback would be more appropriate for Glen Ridge because we front on Glen Ridge. When you get into lot width, it's a little amorphous, and none of the case law really fits it. But certainly, I think that when you have a property that is fully developable within the town that on the block you feel you're part of, but the town where you're primarily behind, and the town you're a member of, but when that zoning is different, I think it creates a hardship. You could certainly look at this as being a C2 for the same rationale that I indicated before. If you take it in its entirety, we're advancing the purposes of the Land Use Act with this subdivision, with the lot width deviation. The three purposes of the Land Use Act that I mentioned: general welfare, as well as for a variety of housing types, as well as historic preservation. All 3 of those kind of combine together to provide a benefit to the community, not just this owner, but a benefit to the community as is outlined in your master plan. At the same time, balancing that against what are the negatives. How are we possibly going to hurt the character of this neighborhood when it's going to be under the purview of Glen Ridge HPC, and we're consistent with the zoning in its entirety. We're consistent with almost every other house on the block in Glen Ridge. So certainly, I think the if you didn't see that as a hardship, because it's not a hardship that I can't always develop a piece of property, but I think it's a hardship when you look at two zoning ordinances and it's not clear as to which one you have to apply to, which to comply with. But in this case, I think it is an unusual situation that arises. It doesn't happen on every lot. It's unique to this one, and I think that it presents a practical difficulty. And as I said, I think you could certainly make the full C2, if the board felt more comfortable on a C2 argument for the entire 3 variances, I think it's certainly defendable.
Next question. Isn't it somewhat a detriment to the community not to have open space?
Well, when we look at open space, we generally look at open space that's for public use,
Yeah.
et cetera. I don't think we don't look at zoning and leaving every 5th lot vacant because it provides for a nice pocket park or an infill, a green space. I think, it's difficult when someone buys a piece of property and they see that it's got some trees on it and it's open and it looks nice. But the property it's not a public park. And I think when we look at creating open space, your ordinance kind of protects you on open space by it sets side yard setbacks for the homes. And we're certainly fully compliant with the side yard setbacks. So we've got enough open space between the properties, so there's no degradation of air, light, and open space. And then even with the lot width, the house width requirement, the fact is, if we're a 60-foot wide lot, we could have a fatter house with the porch. We're a little smaller, so we need that deviation. But the deviation is from an open and transparent portion of the house. So I don't think it's really any negative associated with it. But I don't think the intent when you're looking to create preserve open space is necessarily by rendering oversized lots where they can't be developed.
It's just that the owner bought this knowing, that it had this nice side yard to it and that allowed open space in the neighborhood. And now, after not being here for that long, she wants to cut it up and build a house. So, I don't know, I feel like that is somewhat a detriment to the neighborhood, maybe.
It's
Yeah.
a change. It's certainly a change.
Is any portion of the new house on the new lot going to be in Glen Ridge?
As I said before, I don't think any portion of according to the survey that was prepared by Hingo's, when you apply the average setback, you have minimum 25-foot setback. When you look at the average setback, you're back in excess of 40 feet, 42.88, something like that. So when you're back at that 42-foot setback, no portion of the proposed house will be located. It'll front on Glen Ridge, but no part of the house will actually be in Glen Ridge.
So will Glen Ridge's HPC really have jurisdiction over how the house looks?
They have taken control of that property as part of the neighborhood, and we've already conceded and offered that it's not really required, but I believe as part of the resolution of approval, I believe that the applicant indicated that they would submit to the jurisdiction and approval of the HPC.
I can stipulate to that. I believe it's required, given the fact that the portion of the property is in the district. But even if that were incorrect, we would still stipulate as a condition that any house would have to be approved by the Glen Ridge Historic Preservation Commission. I think it's important because the houses on the other side of the street are, and we're respectful of that.
But the building permits would be through Montclair.
I believe most would be. I don't know if, we may need curb opening permits, things like that. It's where you have to continue to navigate. But my suspicion is that since, certainly on the new house, since all of the building would be in Montclair, we built Montclair building permits. We'd have to make sure that if this board were to grant approval for the side yard deviation at 2.65, we obviously still need to meet fire code requirements, which would be administered, their state building codes, but administered through the township building department. And so either they have to be, the portion might have to be modified to be fire retardant or fire rated, et cetera. And obviously we would have to do all of that. If this board were to grant approval, we still need to meet all of those requirements.
I have one more question.
Yes.
I think you said that all of the proposed new house would be in Montclair. What % of the new lot would be in Montclair?
I would say probably looking at it, about 20%. I
So
think
then-
right now, about 27 to 30% of the combined lot is located in Glen Ridge, and the rest being in Montclair. That's based on an approximate line.
But
But
when
on
you-
the
when you-
smaller lot, about
Yeah.
20%, I think. It's my guess.
So you're saying all of the house and only 20% of the lot on which the house sits is going to be in Montclair? Maybe I misunderstood
I
you.
think you got it reversed. 80%'s in Montclair.
Right,
Oh, no, I was
80%,
about Glen
right.
Ridge. Yeah, no,
That's what I was
Yeah.
trying-
80% of the proposed lot on the left.
So the new lot
proposed
will be 100% of the house in Montclair and 80% of the lot in Montclair.
Correct. That is correct.
Where are the properties assessed?
A person, based on the assessment map, they're assessed in Montclair. And land use advises us that assessment maps are just for assessing, and there's no relationship to zoning in that. There are times when, in addition to that agreement, who gets to tax what, there are times when towns do actually also divide up who gets zoning, but we did not see anything on this property that indicated that. You can see by the cross-hatching. The cross-hatching here indicates that this lot is taxed in, by the way that the hatching faces, it faces Montclair, so it's actually taxed in Montclair. And the house immediately to the right of us, even though a large portion of that is in Montclair, more than 50% is in Montclair, cross-hatching indicates that that house next to us is actually taxed in the borough of Glen Ridge. But again, that's just for tax purposes.
Is that typically done by sort of agreement between the two municipalities? You take this lot, and we'll take this lot,
Yes.
something like that?
My firm prepared a lot of tax maps in our day, and it's a town-by-town agreement, lot by lot, when you get those lots. It's rare when a town takes the extra step to also say who gets to zone it, who gets the building permits. But those maps are just for taxation purposes.
80%. Looks more like 5%.
Any further questions from the board?
I just have one, I should know this, I guess, but you show the new building as being, the same distance from the street as the existing building? Is it required to be the same distance, or could you push it back a little more?
We could certainly push it back more. But we did, it's a little unclear. You have to take the average of 3 houses to the left and 3 houses to the right. When you do that, when you create a new lot, the question is, do you use the existing house to the right now? Because when you're just looking at the subject property, you go 3 right and 3 left. When you create a new lot, do we then go 1, including our new house, and 2? So it dances around that 42.88 feet requirement, where the existing house is at 40.86. But yeah, we could certainly, it wouldn't be difficult. We'd obviously like to preserve as much rear yard as possible. And we want to be consistent with the neighborhood, which is, again, about that 42 to 43 foot setback.
Other questions? Counselor, do you have questions on behalf of objectors?
Yes, I do.
Sir, before you begin, would you please introduce yourself and perhaps even let the board know who you represent?
Good evening, everybody. My name is George Crimmons. I am an attorney with Herald Law, PA, 25 Independence Boulevard, Warren, New Jersey, 07059. And I represent Evan Hernandez, 15 Douglas Road, Glen Ridge, Mark Altman, 16 Douglas Road, Glen Ridge, William Turner, 17 Douglas Road, Glen Ridge.
It's a different address from what's
Okay.
in Mr. Simon's letter.
Okay.
Mr. Altman.
I'm sorry if I have the wrong address then. Warren Frazier, 1 Douglas Road in Glen Ridge, and John Showell, thank you. 5 Douglas Road, Glen Ridge. Did I miss anybody? Okay. So those are my clients.
How many were there total?
5.
Five.
I just point out that there are different, Mr. Simon's letter indicates that the firm was representing 8 residents, so some dropped out.
Okay. So no, it's 8. I don't have the names of the other 3 in front of me,
Okay,
though.
it's the 8 names that are listed in his letter.
Mhm. Okay, my first question is, earlier you said, correct me if I'm wrong here, didn't you say that it's difficult to follow zoning in 2 different municipalities? Is that something that you said before?
You still need the microphone.
I think it creates confusion when you've got 2 different towns, especially when you drive down one street and you've got an address that's in Glen Ridge and then you're zoned in a different town. So it always creates a bit of confusion, yes.
But just to be clear, the house in its current state complies with zoning in both towns?
It does.
Okay, and you're suggesting changes that would not comply with the Montclair ordinances?
That's correct.
Okay. Can you tell me where in the resolution for the Glen Ridge approval it says that you're going to submit to the jurisdiction of the Glen Ridge Historical Commission?
I don't have that. It was expressed to me by my attorney and by the applicant. And certainly, if it's not in that resolution, I did not represent the client. We're willing to stipulate that today.
Okay, so obviously you've discussed this a lot, but there are no building plans yet, correct?
That's correct. It's just a subdivision.
Okay, and you have not informed the board of the location of the driveway, correct?
That is correct.
Or the width of the driveway?
Also correct.
Length?
Correct?
Is there going to be a garage?
There will be a garage.
And where does it show that on the plans?
It doesn't.
Okay, so we don't know the dimensions of any garages or any other improvements?
But they would have to meet the full requirements of the Township of Montclair.
But we don't know that they do, because it's not shown on any of the plans, even though it was requested.
We're stipulating it'll comply, and we recognize that, if we stipulate that the will comply, if we were to come back to this board for relief, the board wouldn't grant us relief, because we'd already stipulated that it will comply with all of those other sections of the ordinance.
Can you tell me what percentage of each front yard is going to be covered by impermeable surface?
I can't.
Because it hasn't been determined yet?
Correct.
Okay. And we don't know if that's going to comply?
We would make it comply.
Okay.
There's no reason to believe that we can't, that these lots at 48 or 50 feet or 60 feet can't be developed with a compliant site plan, grading plan.
And just to be clear, subdividing and building a new house, you're going to end up with more impervious surface than the maximum amount allowed if the property contained only one house, as it currently does.
Well, I'd have to look a little closer at the ordinance, but that's not necessarily so, because if there's a percentage of maximum coverage, it's based upon the lot area. So whether if you have 100,000 square foot lot or you have 10,000 square foot lots, if they're all subject to the same percentage of impervious coverage, there's not going to be any more coverage by having 10 lots as opposed to 1 lot. You're still restricted to the same percentage.
But you're going to end up doubling the amount of impervious coverage, approximately.
I mean, the applicant could certainly look to do a significant addition onto this existing house, to a larger garage. I mean, there's nothing that would stop the applicant from obviously going through HPC, but expanding accessory, putting a pool in, pool deck, accessory structures, doubling the size of the garage, widening the driveway. There's nothing that says that they couldn't add significant amount of coverage to the existing lot without a subdivision and get up to the same numbers, whether it's front yard coverage, whether they did a wider driveway, or it's additional walkways, or it's a pool in the back, et cetera.
Question about the tree removal. Do you have any information about replacement trees for the 2 that came down?
I don't. We'd have to ask the owners here, and can indicate whether they were required or not. Obviously, if a tree is dead or dying, they generally are exempted from portions of the ordinance. So, and I understand they were taken down with permits, but that's hearsay. You'd have to ask the owner.
If those were Montclair trees, they're not exempted from replacement.
Okay.
They're only exempted from paying the fee, I believe.
Even if they're dead or dying? Okay.
I believe that's the case.
Okay.
But you've submitted no plan to the board to talk about or to identify what that replacement would be.
Unfortunately, I submitted no plans at all. These are another surveyors, and no, we're looking at this as creating a new lot line and a new lot, recognizing that there is infrastructure and permitting in place within the township that would make sure all of that is done in a manner that is consistent with the ordinance requirements.
As a planner, are you familiar with the Cicino case, Cicino versus Berkeley Heights, 237 NJ Super 175?
Yes, I am. That's the one that deals primarily with rear yard setbacks in 2 different towns, I believe.
And didn't that case also hold that the applicant needs to produce evidence regarding the size and the appearance of the proposed house so as not to deprive the board of essential data necessary to make a factual evaluation?
I think, as I said earlier, I didn't find that case to be particularly analogous to this one where we have a lot width issue. So I believe that was a finding in that case, but again, I didn't find that, I could not find any case law that was really more consistent and more analogous to this condition, but that was apparently the finding in that case.
It was the finding? Yes, okay.
As I recall, I'd have to reread it. I've read it twice in the last, once back in September and once a week ago. So I believe that's the case. If you wanted, I could take the time and read it, but I believe that is the case.
No, that's okay. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm going to be jumping around a little bit here.
Okay, I was too.
Yeah. I was expecting to be speaking to different people as a planner and an engineer, so I've got 2 different outlines.
There's not really much of an engineering hat I'm wearing today because there's not a lot has been engineered since there's no proposed house.
Right, and you don't have any plans to engineer. Got it.
But I see nothing that would tell me, I walk on a site and I see, oh, this is going to be a problem to do a grading plan, or we're going to have a problem with engineering this property. I've been to the site 3 times. I see nothing that tells me that there's anything out of the ordinary. This will be difficult to meet the ordinance requirements in terms of drainage, access, protecting the neighbors from stormwater. I see nothing. It's a fairly level site with a good grade to it. I see nothing that would preclude an engineer from doing a plan that meets the township requirement. And if they couldn't, they'd have to come back here for a variance, and my suspicion is the board would say no.
Do you know if the owner considered subdividing only one, or subdividing the parcels so that only one lot would be non-conforming, instead of having a situation where you're subdividing one lot to get 2 non-conforming lots?
I do not know.
And you don't know if there are any attempts or any issue looked into in that regard?
I was not part of the preparation of the subdivision, unfortunately, so I don't know what thoughts went into it, other than I think they started with wanting to make sure that the new lot was fully conforming with the Glen Ridge requirements. And that also meant leaving as much space as possible. If you set the proposed lot at 48 feet, which is consistent with Glen Ridge, it allows for the most breathing room on the existing house at 14, and it brings down that deviation in terms of house width to lot width. Certainly, you could slide that around, but then you would have, if you made one of them conforming at 60 feet, you'd have a significantly deficient undersized lot that would be very quirky and perhaps even unbuildable in terms of getting a real-world house on there.
What kind of analysis or report have you put together with regard to the existing homes on Douglas? Let me be more specific. Have you done any sort of survey on when the homes on Douglas were built?
No, I looked at 2 houses. They were both built around 1907, so I don't know if any, or I didn't do an exhaustive study. What I did notice is that relative to the deviation requested, which was for lot width, every other house on the block in Glen Ridge, with the exception of one that comes in at 47, was compliant with the 48-foot minimum. So that's the extent of the neighborhood survey I did. I didn't look at the dates, the typology of the houses, the era. I didn't think it was particularly relevant to the matter before the board.
And you didn't do any survey, just to be clear, you didn't do any survey of the width of the homes or what type of features are on the homes? If there's any consistency to that? No style or aesthetics? You didn't do any sort of survey like that?
No style or aesthetics, because that's under the HPC auspices. And with regard to the exhibit that's up right now, the setbacks, that I did take, because that was the only place that information was provided to me. We did no surveying ourselves. I did no measuring between buildings. I didn't go on any of the properties where I wasn't invited. And so I only did them on this one, and I think that the exhibit I have shows that our proposal is not inconsistent with the other homes in the neighborhood in terms of the dimensional setbacks and bulk requirements relative to the setbacks and relative to the lot widths.
On that note, can you zoom in a bit on this?
Yep. Where would you like me to do?
This is fine. As I recall before, you...
Mr. Crimmons, I'm so sorry, but you'll need to stay with the microphone.
Can I borrow this one? Yeah. As I recall before, you were talking about the distances between the houses, and you said that this distance, this proposed distance, is consistent with the other distances in the neighborhood, right?
Actually, the 17.23 feet, I think, is consistent with other homes in the neighborhood. The 12.65 is actually meets the minimum separation requirements based upon the township of Montclair ordinance of 6 foot and 6 foot. So obviously 6 and 6 being 12, we exceed that. And but with regard to, so clearly 12.65 is less than exists on the rest of the block, but the 17.23 is not atypical. It's a little smaller than some of the other ones, and certainly, you know, when we look at the 100-foot property to the left, but when you come to the right, and again, some of these dimensions, for instance, on lot 4 here, there's what's not shown is the surveyor showed the setbacks at the front porch line. If you come back 10, 15 feet back further, there's a 2-foot jog, a bay that sticks out. So this 7.75 number actually may not be correct, and I believe it's on that property. I know that a number of these houses have bay windows further back from the front setback. Again, the purpose for this was for front setbacks, and the surveyor showed a portion of the houses, but he didn't show the entire configuration of the house as he did on the property at 14. So, for instance, bays that stick out as they do on the back of our property are not necessarily shown on the adjoining properties. And if that was critical to the board, we could actually get a surveyor to remotely get those distances, and you'd see that this 18.2, 17.3, these numbers actually start to come down when we add all of the rear jogs and bays that we had on this one. So when we look at 17.23 from the building envelope to the bay, and again, this house is not going to be a rectangle. It's going to have some accrenulation and some jogs in it, some bays in it, but it can't ever get closer than 17.23 feet to the existing house, and that is not inconsistent with other houses in the neighborhood. We've got 17.3, and I don't have all of the bays shown.
It can't get closer than 17.23 or whatever that was, but it does show 12.65 to the currently existing house, just to be clear.
That's correct.
To the
12.65 to the porch. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And again, if the board really had a problem with that, even though it's open and, as I said, diaphanous, it's kind of, you view through it, it's breezy and open and not so heavy. If the board had a problem with that, the applicant would agree to remove it or remove enough of it to eliminate the variances, and then they would have to go to the Borough of Glen Ridge and show the design to the HPC and hopefully get approval for it. But they would be willing to get rid of that. We think it's a C2 variance where there's really no benefit in taking it out. It is better the way it is and it has no negative impact. But if the board felt differently, where the applicant has indicated, they will remove that encroachment.
But the distances between the houses, you've got a few that you've measured, and the rest you're just eyeballing.
No, actually, that's from the survey.
That's from the survey.
All those are from the survey.
Right,
They're-
but the rest of the neighborhood, that you're saying it is consistent with
The
others.
ones that I'm showing, anywhere I have a dimension, that is survey dimensions.
Right, you've got 4 lots.
Yeah, well, I only had what the surveyor showed for the average setback, so, if the board felt it was imperative that we had, a more exhaustive study of the distances between houses, we could certainly do that. I don't know what it would tell you, other than, if it was critical, and I guess the applicant could make a decision. They said, well, we don't want to do that study, so we'll just agree to lop off part of the house. But I think that these numbers that we've shown, because they're at the front line, are actually conservative, and I think that distance on the main house. So if we got rid of the porch, we'd have 17.23, and that would be consistent with other homes in the neighborhood.
What about that way?
So, I'm sorry, so, just to clarify, this is just not exhaustive.
It's not exhaustive,
Right.
yeah. And clearly, as you move into the houses that are 100-foot, 113-foot wide, these have larger separations between them. And we still maintain 41.97 feet between us and the neighbor at street number 10, which again is far more than the 12-foot that is allowed by zoning. And so even though we're coming, considerably closer than the existing lot, there's still quite a bit of breathing room between us and the neighbors when you compare the 3 houses that are clearly they're consistent with the Montclair zoning ordinance.
So you have this information, but you didn't submit it because you didn't think it was relevant.
I have what I have here today as an exhibit because I thought this was relevant.
Right, but the remainder of the information about the neighborhood, you talked a lot about consistency with the neighborhood.
Well, I think in consistency with the neighborhood, my primary purpose for the tax map was to show that the 48-foot lot and the 50.75-foot lot were consistent with all of the lot widths in the Borough of Glen Ridge district.
How many lots are narrower than the proposed new lot?
Narrower? One that I know of. Narrow. There's one at 47. There's one non-compliant.
There's one non-compliant, and you're suggesting to make another lot, that would be the second narrowest in the neighborhood.
But fully conforming with the zoning ordinance. So
In Glen
because-
Ridge,
in
but
Glen
not
Ridge.
in
But not, yeah,
not here.
Clearly, no, clearly. But if we talk about, lots, and I can, if it was important to the board, I could certainly come back with the Montclair tax map, which shows lots that are larger, but a number that are significantly smaller than 50 feet, that are in the blocks that require 60-foot zones. So it's not atypical, and if it was important to this board, I don't think it's necessarily important to this board to go 3-4 blocks away, but those are blocks that are in the same zone. They do require 60-foot wide lots, and they are a variety. There are some that are considerably wider, and there are a lot that are considerably smaller. I didn't think it was relevant because I think we're talking about the character of the neighborhood and preserving the neighborhood, which is a goal of planning. We're talking about the neighborhood that's defined by the 36 houses on Douglas Road, 32 or 33 of which clearly are in Glen Ridge and are all fluttering around that 50-foot width.
But you think that the neighbors who live right behind in Montclair are not part of the same neighborhood?
I think from if I'm behind and I'm looking at the back property, I think my concern is going to be that I meet the required setbacks, rear yard setbacks from my lot line, because that's what if I look in my backyard, I don't want to necessarily see a house that's 15 feet off the rear line when mine has to be 25 or 40 or 50 feet off the line. So I think that we will be fully compliant with the rear setbacks, and that to me is what I'm concerned about as a neighbor behind. Again, given the distance, I don't think you're going to see the difference between 48 or 50. You might see 60, but I think that, again, it doesn't go to any adverse impact on the neighbors that are, in my opinion, that are on Franklin Place if I have a 48-foot lot versus a 60-foot lot where the house is 100 feet behind mine.
Okay. Thank you for your answers and your opinions. I have my own witness who's going to give his own opinions on these same issues once that would be appropriate in the meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who aren't represented by counsel who wish to ask questions? Please step forward. Yes. And these are questions of the witness,
Yes. Do I need to be sworn in, or?
not
Okay.
for questions.
Great.
But just, yeah, if you can give us your name and address, that'd
Yes.
be great.
My name is Felicia Berger. I reside at 24 Douglas Road.
Can you spell your last name?
It's Berger, and Felicia is Felicia. So I had 3 questions that came up, okay? Related to the testimony. The first was enforcing compliance with stipulations that this board may or may not choose to enact. We've been told by the applicant that they may develop the property themselves, but they may also sell the property. So how does this board view these kinds of stipulations about building as of right when the property changes ownership? That's something I wanted to ask you, since you testified to that.
Well, the resolution, any resolution this board might offer runs with the land, and the zoning ordinances are independent of ownership, so they would still, any modifications, whether this applicant built the house or someone else built the house, they're still subject to the same regulations within the community.
But it doesn't show up on a deed or a title search, so somebody who's looking to buy the property, unless it's disclosed by the current owner, would not know that. Is that correct?
It's the town basically is the one who would enforce the regulations of the subdivision. If a prospective purchaser would be their responsibility to understand the zoning as it applies and apply the zoning. It would be a bonus when they found out they could actually get a deviation. Well, on the existing house, on the proposed lot, there's no deviations that go along with that other than the lot width. So
Correct, but you are trying to ensure the community and the board that no additional deviations or variances would be requested because it could be built as of right, but you cannot ensure that.
Well, let me, if I might, let me just, I think it might be easier if I address
Yeah,
it.
thank you.
Whoever buys the house is going to be bound by the applicable regulations in Glen Ridge and in Montclair. And whether they have notice of them or not, they're not going to be allowed to build and not comply unless they come to this board or Glen Ridge's board to get a variance. So, yeah, he can't guarantee that another builder might not come and ask for a variance, but they would have to be granted permission, and there'd have to be another proceeding like this. And of course, there's nothing that stops his client from coming back, and if they want to build on that and asking for a variance too. The fact of the matter is, though, that all the properties are bound by the municipal regulations that in zoning laws that apply to them. So regardless of whether they know of it or not, if they buy something and they anticipate doing something that's not permitted, then that's their problem.
No, and that's my understanding, but there were testimony that basically said, we will stipulate to this and we will stipulate to that, but it's not enforceable.
And well, I think that they're stipulating with respect to the existing property, the existing house, rather. And what the relief that they're asking for in connection with that existing house. Because they're really not asking for relief with respect to the other property, so much as they're asking for with the existing house and the subdivision itself, the width of the two plots, once they get subdivided, if they get subdivided.
Thank you for the clarification and the response. So one of the questions I have is related to this diagram about the distance between the houses. You stated that it cannot be closer than 12.5 or 12.65 feet, but you have assumed that the wider side yard lot line is on the north side, closer to 14. But we've heard from the applicant previously that there would be potential tree removal because the driveway would likely be on the south side of that property, which would mean that the 10-foot setback would likely be on the south side. So in fact, it could potentially be closer than 12.65.
We're willing to stipulate that we'll meet the 10-foot requirement. Yeah.
But that would be on the new property.
On the new property, but the 10-foot would be on the right.
But we can't guarantee that based on.
Well, we're
Mr. Wood's
getting
response.
a variance for a distance of well, you're right, technically our variance is for 2.65 feet to the on the existing house. So yeah, we would either have to stipulate that. Generally, there's a language in the resolution that says we're bound by the conditions of the testimony, but at this point.
What about what about the building envelope? Can they stipulate to the building envelope on the undeveloped property?
They're bound by whatever the setbacks are in the ordinance.
Right, but what she's saying is that there's a 10-foot and a 6-foot. So she's saying that they could swap it so that, based on the testimony, he's assuming that the 10-foot is going to be on the joint property line. But they could switch it so that the 6-foot is on that joint property line, unless there's some way to guarantee that there's only going to be the 10-foot. And so they would have to stipulate to the location of the building envelope in order, and can we do that within?
Well, let me make sure I understand.
With the subdivision.
You're stipulating to a 10-foot setback.
Minimum 10-foot on the right side.
On the right side.
Right, on the joint property line.
On the joint property line.
The new property line that was established.
And obviously you would somebody would need a variance if it was less than 6 foot on the other side.
Right.
Correct.
So what is the width?
Well,
The house, if you build to both of those setbacks.
Well, that's I think what you're showing up there is, in the gray, is the building envelope.
Yeah, so
right?
that's has to be a total of 16.8
Right.
feet.
So the
it's gotta
gray
be
is, that's a workable building envelope.
Yeah.
I mean, they
And
wouldn't have to make a narrow house, but it has to be situated like that on the property with the 10-foot to the north and the 6-foot to the south.
I would say what we probably would be to stipulate that it would be 10 foot on the right, and that a minimum of 10 feet on the right. Because we may decide that there's that 0.8, so it's normally the minimum is 6, but we have to be 6.8 to meet the lot width, the house width requirement. So it's possible that we might want to go 10.8 on the right side and 6 on the left.
Mhm.
But I would say a minimum would be on the right side would be 10 feet.
But are there any trees on the right, on the left side, on the south side that?
He's saying,
That would
or
need to
they've
be-
testified that there's no trees in the building called the trees, because he's saying all the trees are in Glen Ridge,
Well,
or in the front part of the property,
the-
but we want to see that.
See, we don't
We
have.
want to see that plotted
but
out.
See, we were missing some information
Yes.
to
But
understand that.
I guess the crux
And-
of my question is the testimony that says that the two buildings will not be closer than 12.65.
At
And the
that-
reality is your zoning actually permits them to be, if you maintain the porch, if you agree to the variance that allows the porch to be within the, less than the 6-foot side yard setback, then these buildings can actually be 9.65 apart.
Unless we stipulate to the location of the building envelope.
Got it.
Well-
So that it's a 10, and I think we can do that.
I think so.
If
Could it
we
be
were-
as simple as a
If we were going
deed
to
rest-
approve it, if we can arrange for it to,
Right.
because that's the way that it's being presented to us,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't believe that we want them any closer than that, unless we decide that we want them to chop off the porch. So,
Could it be as simple as requiring a deed restriction on the new lot, saying you cannot develop within
I don't even think we have
whatever
to
feet
go
of the
that far. I
joint
think we
property
can
line?
do it as part of
As the
the,
resolution.
as part of
Okay.
the subdivision if we grant it.
We would certainly stipulate to that,
Yeah.
that you'd have the minimum of 10 feet on that side.
Yeah.
No less than.
No less than
10
10.
feet.
Correct.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Sure. All right, gentlemen, it's almost 10:30. We don't take any new testimony after 10:30. I see you have Mr. Steck in the wings, waiting to go. And I know that yourself, Mr. Tremulak, and the other counselor want to be able to
Grill him, yes.
write and also be able to put on some additional witnesses. So we're going to have to carry this to another meeting to continue this.
I just had very brief testimony. I'd like my client literally to talk about the trees that were removed, which would take no more than a couple of minutes. If
Sure.
you could do that now.
We can clean that up, yeah, real quick. We have some clarity on that.
Okay,
Ms.
you
Vargas.
realize you're still under oath.
Right.
Yes,
Okay.
I realize that.
Can you talk about the circumstances as to why those two trees were removed that were originally in front of the house?
Well, one was in the front and one was in the rear.
I can't hear you.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so one tree was in the front, the other one was in the rear. They were larger caliber trees. I don't recall the exact species. Both were quite diseased. In fact, the one in the rear had a cavity that had been growing over time. On separate occasions, both of the trees lost limbs during a storm. The one to a rear specifically actually lost a limb that was so large that it poked a hole in a roof that was about at least a foot wide. And so we hired arborists to come and inspect both trees on separate occasions. And for both trees, the recommendation was to have them removed. So we did apply for the appropriate permits and remove those trees separately while meeting the legal requirements. But unfortunately, due to preserving our house and the safety of our child, we felt it was best to remove both trees, and we were given permission to do so.
You got permits from Glen Ridge?
So I think the tree in the front was technically a Glen Ridge tree, and so that one we received Glen Ridge permission to remove. And then conversely, the tree in the rear was a Montclair tree, and so for that tree we went to Montclair for permission.
So you got permits to remove both trees?
Correct, yes.
Is there any requirement to replace either of those trees?
No, my understanding is that there was not.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Sure.
When were they removed?
Exact dates, I really don't remember.
Ballpark?
The second one to come down, I think, was, honestly, I can't remember.
I think it would have to be within the last 2 years because. you
Oh,
have
no,
to do
definitely. I think both of them came down in the last year.
So for the Montclair tree at least, you should have paid either into the fund or replaced the tree on the property.
We definitely paid money to have them removed.
Right, but there's a payment that goes to Montclair to, if you're not going to replace the tree on your property, you pay into the fund so that Montclair can basically plant another tree within the township on your behalf in a way.
So then we probably did that. My husband handled the payments for those transactions, so I honestly cannot comment on those.
So for the next meeting, if you can just confirm the details.
Sure, happy to.
Sure.
Did the
John,
arborist review any of the other trees to see whether they were diseased?
Yes, we've had all of the trees on our property looked at because they've all lost limbs over the course of the last 4 years that we've resided on the property.
But the trees you just described, the two trees were the only trees that came down.
Correct. And the reason we took them down is because they were the ones in closest proximity to the structure. So they presented, danger to us during stormy conditions. I believe one of the 3 large remaining trees is pretty diseased. It's a tulip tree. We've been told to take that tree down. We haven't done anything about it yet because we'd rather not. But again, we decided to tackle the trees that were the closest to the house.
I have a question, it should be quick. The Montclair Code, which requires width or frontage, I need clarification. Are we talking, I think that the numbers that are on our zoning map refer to frontage, But this lot has no frontage on Franklin Street. So my question is, does the 60 feet apply? I don't think it's width, I think it's frontage.
No,
So,
it's lot width. Right,
well,
Dennis?
Yeah.
okay, well, I guess on page 5, it says, requires a minimum lot frontage of 60 feet, and it only has 48. So, it says on page 5 of the memo, Montclair Code 347-18D requires a minimum lot frontage.
The requirement is actually lot width. I looked at that for the same purpose
Okay.
that you did,
Okay.
because I was kind of hoping if it was just frontage and not width, I could say just that.
Oh.
But it didn't work out that way. The ordinance.
Well,
is
suppose
actually-
you have a lot that's not
Square.
square or rectangle. Then it's an average or something?
Well,
This doesn't
it's-
apply here, so I
right,
shouldn't,
it's
yeah.
lot width, so it has to be.
So it is width,
Yeah,
okay.
you measure the lot width
Okay.
at the minimum required setback for the property.
Oh, good,
Right.
thank you.
Yep. I wish it was frontage. They're often used interchangeably, and some ordinances require that frontage be the same as lot width, except on curved streets, but unfortunately, it's actually lot width.
All right, so Janice, when would we be able to reconvene on this?
We have, well, our next meeting date's December 12th, but we have a presentation that night.
Right.
So my suggestion is December 19th.
Counselors, any conflicts?
And as far as the 19th, we're also
Is that a
possibly
Monday?
continuing to discuss the presentation from the 12th?
I think we will.
Okay.
I think we could do both. We could, the rest of this application, the continuing
Okay.
discussion.
I might not be available.
on
But that question is, do the public get to
Okay.
ask questions of the presenters on the 12th? If so, it could be a long meeting.
Oh, you don't know, we
Oh,
don't
and the
know.
other matter.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you might want to think about that if you set dates.
If we can't do it the 19th, then we go to January, and we just adopted the calendar for January. Then the next meeting would be January 9th.
Mr. Chairman, could I request that the exhibits that were shown to us tonight be presented or provided to the board, and certainly to me, because I'm the guy drafting that resolution?
Hopefully in PDF versions as well.
And are you going to revise anything to show the trees?
We're going to consider
Okay.
that. You know, we've heard the board's comments, and it's something we'll talk about.
Okay. All right, so this will be carried until January,
9th.
and no further notices will be issued. And if we need consents for extension, Counselor shaking his head, yes, that they're great.
We consent any necessary extension.
All right. All right, gentlemen, thank you. We'll see you in the new year then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see. Where does that leave us? Don't have any bills right now? That we didn't have any. If you didn't see them, we don't have them. And we already.
I didn't, are you talking about the bills?
Yeah, did we have any bills?
We
I
have
didn't-
bills.
Yes, we had
We
some,
have
but
committee
I didn't see
reports,
any.
though?
Because I was,
Committee reports, Janice?
excuse me?
Committee reports.
Oh, we can do committee reports.
Yeah.
Before we get to the bills.
Okay.
And we can.
Well, I didn't look at the bills because they weren't
Well,
emailed.
no,
and I don't
I
get
know.
hard copies, so.
Yeah. I'll just say, the redevelopment committee, which consists of Kevin, myself, and Tony, we did meet by phone, right?
We had a
met-
Zoom meet-
We had a
we
Zoom meeting.
Zoomed.
Yeah, we had a Zoom meeting.
This is the
and-
21st century. That qualifies as a meeting.
Anyway, and so we had some discussion about Lackawanna Plaza, but we decided that we would wait to produce our report to you until after we hear the consultant's report,
Right.
because they may answered the questions that we have. So, just wanted to update you
Right,
guys
and
on
we
that.
encourage people, there is going to be a public presentation about the redevelopment plan on November 29th at Hillside School
At 7 o'clock.
at 7 o'clock.
Yep.
If anybody wants to go, and we'll see some more images that
You
are.
said
consult-
Hillside.
Hillside.
At Hillside,
Will there be a 3D
in the
model?
cafeteria. Okay?
That should be interesting.
But we'll also have our own presentation December 12th.
Buffalo,
So are we going to not pay the bills because we did
Keith
not?
said he didn't see them.
Right, because I didn't get a chance
And if
to.
Keith didn't see them, then I don't think we should pay them. because-
I wasn't in my office when I sent out the email.
I didn't see anything wrong with the bills, to be quite honest.
I think they're your bills. They're your
Keith,
bills.
Nobody gets to say Merry Christmas when they see their check?
All right, Carol. All right.
Our board CFO has to review the,
Yeah, that was adopted tonight, except we're starting at 7:30, not 7. I mean, yeah, 7:30.
right. And you'll republish that, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
All right, so I think that's it. Motion to adjourn.
I think everybody's moving to it.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Same to you. Happy Thanksgiving all.
I'm reading this.
I just didn't know what to expect tonight.
It says what?